He said her name like it was a joke the court hadn't heard yet, rejected her at the altar, stripped her of everything but the satchel on her hip, and told her the frontier would finish what his words had started. It didn't. Before we go any further, if you want to see the moment Ronan Kyle realizes what he threw away, stay with me to the very end. Smash that like button, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, and let's begin. The river island of Verith Hold sat in the middle of the Black Ember River like a closed fist, and on the morning of the mate selection, the fog came off the water so thick that the torches along the dock looked like small orange wounds in the gray. Elara Voss stepped off the ferry with her satchel clutched against her ribs and tried to remember how to breathe through her nose so the people watching her wouldn't see her shoulders move. They were watching. That was the thing. She had crossed enough rivers in her 22 years to know when eyes were on her, and there were a lot of eyes on her now, peering out from under fur-trimmed hoods, leaning over the rails of the upper gallery, whispering behind gloved hands. None of them were friendly. None of them were hostile either. They were just curious, in the way that people are curious about a cart animal that has wandered into the wrong yard. "Keep walking, girl." The ferryman's hand came down on her shoulder, not unkind, and pushed her forward a step. "You're blocking the plank." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be quick." She was quick. She kept her head down and her feet moving, and she tried not to look at the other women gathering in the muster yard at the end of the dock. It was impossible not to look. There were 30 of them, give or take, and every single one of them had been sewn into a dress that cost more than Elara's entire house. Silk, the color of spilled wine. Wolf gray velvet with silver thread. A redhead near the front in a gown so pale it looked like ice had been melted and poured over her. Elara looked down at her own clothes. Brown wool, a linen tunic her mother had dyed with onion skins 3 summers ago, back when her mother was still alive to dye things. A leather belt cinched twice because it had been her father's, and her father had been a bigger man. Name? She hadn't noticed the scribe. He was seated at a small folding table on the edge of the yard, a ledger open in front of him, a quill already wet in his hand. He did not look up. "Elara Voss." "Spell it." She spelled it. He wrote it down. His quill made a sound like a fly trying to get out of a jar. "House?" "Voss." "I know it's Voss, girl. I just wrote it." "Which pack?" "No pack." The quill stopped. For the first time, the scribe lifted his face, and his face was the face of a man who had already decided to be annoyed with her before she'd given him a reason. He had a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that were too small for the rest of his head. "No pack," he repeated. "No, my father was—" "Save it." He wrote something else. He did not ask her what her father had been. "Territory. Hollowbrook, the fens east of Hollowbrook." He made a small sound in his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a cough, and she understood in that moment that the sound was the sound of her name being filed away in a box labeled joke. "You got the summons in Hollowbrook?" "Yes. Personally." "A writer brought it." "A writer brought it." He wrote that down too, slowly, as if each word cost him something. Then he set the quill in its holder and leaned back. "Miss Voss, do you know how these selections work?" Because I'll tell you how they work. The Alpha King sends riders to every pack of standing in the 5 river valleys. Every pack. Every one of standing. And the heads of those packs, the Alphas, Miss Voss, they choose which of their unmated daughters they put forward. You understand me?" "Yes." "No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing here. Your name's not on my list of pack submissions. Your name's on a separate list, a list of—" He flicked the page. "Open call names. Names the king's brother decided to add from what I can only assume was some charitable impulse. You are here because Lord Doran felt sorry for someone, Miss Voss. And I do not know which of the old women of the court he was trying to flatter by putting a Hollowbrook herb woman on a list of potential queens, but I want you to understand, before you take another step, that is why you are here. Do you understand?" She understood. Her face was hot. Her ears were hot. The hand that was holding her satchel was squeezing the strap so tight that her knuckles had gone the color of uncooked bone. "Yes," she said. "Good. Yards to your left. Don't speak unless spoken to." She walked to the yard. The redhead in the ice dress watched her all the way, not smiling, not frowning, just tracking her the way a cat tracks a bird it has already decided not to bother eating. Elara found a place at the back of the group and made herself as small as she could, which was not very small. She had her mother's height. Her mother had been tall. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came from her right, low, almost kind. She turned her head. A girl about her own age stood beside her, dark-haired, sharp-cheeked, in a gown the color of a winter pine. She was not looking at Elara. She was looking straight ahead at the great hall at the top of the hill. "I know," Elara said. "No, I mean, you really shouldn't be here. They eat girls like you for sport." "I didn't choose to come." "Doesn't matter. You came." The girl's mouth twitched. "My cousin was an open call named 2 selections ago. Different king, same court. She got sent back missing 3 fingers. Whatever they ask you to do up there, do it fast. Don't look at him. Don't speak unless he speaks first. And for the love of every river spirit your people pray to, don't try to be interesting." "Who are you?" "Someone who is going to pretend she never spoke to you the moment we get inside. Good luck, Hollowbrook." She walked away. Elara stayed where she was. She could hear the river behind her and the murmuring of the women in front of her, and somewhere above her, distantly, the long, slow note of a horn, the kind of horn you blow when a king is about to come out of his hall. The Great Hall of Vareth had been built 300 years ago by a king who wanted to make sure his guests knew who they were visiting. The ceiling was so high that the banners hanging from its beams looked like small colored squares from the floor. The walls were black stone veined with something that caught torchlight and threw it back in little silver splinters. There were wolf heads mounted on every pillar, real ones, old ones. Some of them were older than anyone in the room. Elara filed in with the other women and stood where the heralds pointed her to stand. The herald who pointed at her did not meet her eyes. She was at the end of the line, which turned out to be the worst place to be, because at the end of the line she could see down the entire row of women, every one of them taller or prettier or better born, and she could see the dais at the far end of the hall, and on the dais she could see the throne, and the throne was empty. Not for long. The horns went again. A door opened behind the dais. Guards came through first, 4 of them, in black leather with silver at the collars, and behind the guards came a tall man with a red sash across his chest, whom Elara took to be some kind of steward. And behind the steward came 2 lords whose names she did not know, but whose faces she recognized from the coins she sometimes took in trade at the market. And behind the lords came the king. She had never seen him in person. She had heard him described 100 times, and every description had fallen short of the thing itself. Ronan Kyle was 6.5 feet of wolf made to stand upright and wear man's clothes. His hair was the color of wet iron. His face was the face you got when you took a handsome face and carved away anything soft or uncertain, and then sanded it down with 20 years of war, and then finished it with a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. He wore black. He wore a collar of gray fur. He moved the way big predators move when they have nothing left to prove to anyone in the room. He did not look at the line of women. He walked straight to his throne, sat down, put his elbow on the armrest, and said to the steward in a voice that carried without effort, "Let's get this over with." The steward bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty. We will begin with the house presentations. First, no." The steward froze. "Sire, no house presentations." Ronan's eyes moved finally to the women. They moved slowly, the way a butcher's eyes move over a row of hanging meat. "I know the houses. I know what every one of them wants out of this. I want to see the women, one at a time. Step forward when I call your name. Speak when I ask you to. Don't speak when I don't." A small sound went through the line of women. Not a gasp. Something quieter than a gasp. The steward looked as if someone had poured cold water down his back. "Your Majesty, the protocol?" "The protocol is what I say it is. Begin." The steward began. He called the first name in a voice that had shrunk 2 sizes since he'd walked in. The redhead in the ice dress stepped forward. She curtsied. Ronan asked her 3 questions: how old she was, what her father farmed, whether she could ride. She answered all 3. He dismissed her. Next name. A blonde girl from one of the southern packs. Same questions, same answers. Dismissed. It went like that for an hour. Elara stood very still. She had decided that if she did not move, if she did not breathe, if she made herself into a small piece of furniture at the end of the line, she could simply be forgotten. Perhaps the steward would run out of names before he reached hers. Perhaps the king would grow bored and leave. Perhaps the hall would catch fire. Any of these outcomes seemed equally plausible, and she prayed for each of them in turn, and none of them happened. Elara Voss. The hall went quiet in a way that hall had not been quiet before. Not because anyone knew her, because no one knew her. The name had not been preceded by a house. A name without a house was a strange animal in that room, and every head in the gallery turned to see what kind of animal it was. She stepped forward. Her legs worked. That was a small miracle. She walked the length of the hall with her eyes on the floor because she had been told to, and because if she lifted them, she was going to be sick. She stopped at the foot of the dais. She curtsied. She had practiced the curtsy for 3 days in the barn at Hollowbrook with a kitchen rag tied around her waist to mimic a skirt, and she still did it wrong. Her left foot went behind where her right foot should have been. She felt it happen. She could not fix it. Ronan said nothing for a long moment. She could feel him looking at her. Everyone could feel him looking at her. The silence stretched out and out and out until somewhere in the gallery, someone coughed, and the cough sounded like a cannon. "Look at me." She looked up. His eyes were the color of a river in winter. There was no warmth in them, and no cruelty either, which she understood almost immediately was worse than cruelty. Cruelty was a kind of attention. What he was giving her was the other thing. Inspection. "Voss," he said, "I don't know this house." "There isn't one, Your Majesty." "Explain." "My father was not an alpha. He was a healer. He ran a lodge in the Hollowbrook Fens. We treated travelers, packless wolves, humans sometimes who'd lost their way on the river road. So no pack. No, Your Majesty. No blood of standing. My mother's mother's mother was of House Vallon, but that was 4 generations ago, and the house fell, I know. So no pack, no blood, no standing. What is it you do exactly?" "I'm an herbalist." "Say again." "An herbalist, Your Majesty. I grow plants. I make remedies." Somewhere in the gallery a woman laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was a small, surprised laugh, the kind of laugh you laugh when someone at a dinner party says something you can't quite believe they've said out loud. And it was followed almost instantly by another laugh, longer, from the other side of the gallery, and then a third. And then the hall filled up with the sound of a thing Elara had never heard before, which was 200 people trying not to laugh at her, and failing, and not being very sorry about failing. Ronan did not laugh. He did not smile. He watched the laughter happen around him the way a man watches weather happen out a window. "An herbalist," he said when the noise had died down, "has been put on the selection list for Alpha Queen of the 5 Rivers. It wasn't my choice, Your Majesty. I did not ask whose choice it was. I am merely noting the fact." "Steward." "Sire? Who added this name?" "Lord Doran, Your Majesty, at the last review." "Of course he did." Something moved in Ronan's jaw, something small and bone-hard. He looked back at Elara. "My brother, Miss Voss, has a habit of finding what he calls interesting candidates. He does this because he thinks I take this process too seriously. He thinks I should lighten up. Do you know what the Alpha Queen of the 5 Rivers does, Miss Voss?" She holds the bond with the king. She shares his burden. In times of famine, she is expected to carry the grief of the land. In times of war, she is expected to stand on the wall. In times of plague, she is expected to walk the quarters of the sick and be seen, so that the people understand they have not been abandoned. She is expected to bear heirs strong enough to survive their first winter. She is expected to be able to ride 14 hours without complaint, speak 4 border dialects, negotiate with 8 border lords, and kill a man with a knife if a man ever gets close enough to put her in that position. Can you do those things, Miss Voss? "No, Your Majesty." "Say it louder. I don't think the gallery heard." "No, Your Majesty." "Can you ride?" "A donkey." Another laugh, bigger this time. "Can you wield a blade?" "I know how to cut a plant at the root." "Can you bear a pup of royal blood?" That one caught her in the chest. She didn't answer right away. She didn't know what the honest answer was. She didn't know what he wanted the answer to be. "I don't know, Your Majesty." "You don't know?" "I've never—" "I believe you, steward, sire." "Strike this name." "Yes, sire." It should have ended there. It would have ended there if he had been the kind of king who let things end. He struck names all morning. He had struck 4 names already. Each of the struck women had walked back to the line with her head down and her pride leaking out of her, and the hall had moved on, and the business of the day had resumed. Elara was already turning. She was already taking the first step back toward her place at the end of the line, already thinking, it's done, it's done, it's done. Just keep walking and it will be done. Wait. She stopped. She did not turn around. She could not make herself turn around. Turn around, Miss Voss. She turned around. Ronan had not risen from his throne. He was leaning forward now, one elbow on his knee, his chin resting on the knuckles of his right hand, and he was looking at her with a new kind of attention, and this attention was worse than the inspection had been. This attention was the attention of a man who had just noticed something he did not like. My brother did not add you to this list for charity, he said. My brother does not do charity. My brother added you to this list because he is making a point, and I want to be sure I understand the point before I let you leave this hall. Come closer. She came closer, 3 steps. She stopped at the edge of the dais. Closer. She climbed the first step. There. He studied her. What's in the satchel, Miss Voss? Remedies, Your Majesty? Show me. She opened the satchel. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. She took out a small linen pouch, and then a stoppered bottle, and then a second pouch, and she laid each item on the step between them. Willow bark, valerian root, a tincture for fevers, a paste for burns, dried yarrow for bleeding. Each item she named. He watched her name them. When she was done, there were 6 small things arranged on the stone step, and they looked, against the black marble, like the trinkets of a child who had been playing at being a witch. This is what you brought, he said, to a mate selection. I was told to bring what I had of value. And this is what you have of value. Yes, Your Majesty. He reached down. He picked up the bottle. He held it to the torchlight. The liquid inside was the color of weak tea. What does this one do? It brings down a fever, Your Majesty. Does it? Yes. You're certain. I've given it to 80 people. It worked on all of them, but 2, and those 2 were... Spare me. He set the bottle down. He did not set it down carefully. It clinked against the stone. Miss Voss, do you understand what you are? You are a message. You are a message my brother has sent me in the middle of an event that is supposed to be about the future of this kingdom. The message is that I take this too seriously. The message is that any woman in the valleys is, in theory, a candidate, and that the standards by which we select our queens are arbitrary, and that perhaps we should be more open, more democratic. Perhaps we should be willing to put an herb woman on the throne of the 5 rivers. That is the message. You are the envelope. Your Majesty, I have not given you permission to speak. Listen to me very carefully, Miss Voss, because what I say in the next 60 seconds will determine the remainder of your life. The law of this kingdom, the ancient law, written before my grandfather's grandfather was born, states that when a candidate is presented at a selection and is found to be unworthy by the reigning alpha, the alpha has 3 options. He may reject her with dignity, and she returns to her house. He may reject her with censure, and she is barred from future selections. Or he may reject her under the old right, which strips her of her family's claim on the land she came from and exiles her to the frontier with nothing but what she can carry. Do you know why that 3rd option exists, Miss Voss? No, Your Majesty. It exists so that when a lord sends a message to his king through a woman's body, the king has a way to send the message back. She understood then. She understood with the whole of herself, all at once, and it was the kind of understanding that arrived in her stomach before it arrived in her head. Her knees nearly gave. She did not let them. Some small, stubborn part of her father's daughter locked into place at the back of her spine and held her up. Your Majesty, she said. Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. Please, I know you didn't. That's why the message needs to be clear. If I send you home with dignity, my brother wins. If I send you home with censure, my brother wins. There is one option left to me, Miss Voss, and I am sorry for you, genuinely sorry, but I am not a king who loses messages. Please, Elara Voss of Hollowbrook. He rose from the throne. He rose very slowly, and the hall rose with him, because when the alpha rises, the court rises. And she was the only one still standing in place at the foot of the dais, and she felt very small indeed. You have been presented to this court as a candidate for the station of Alpha Queen of the Five Rivers. I find you unworthy of this station. I find you weak of body, weak of lineage, and weak of standing. I find your presence here an embarrassment to the traditions of this hall and an insult to the women who stand behind you. Under the old right, I reject you. I sever your family's claim on the lands of Hollowbrook. I strip you of the protections of this kingdom. You are given what you carry on your person and no more. You will be put on the evening ferry, and you will be set down on the north bank at Aldmere, and you will walk, Miss Voss, into the frontier, and the frontier will decide what it wants to do with you. Do you understand? She could not speak. Do you understand? Yes. It came out a whisper. Yes, Your Majesty. Clear the step. She reached down to gather her things. She reached for the bottle first. Her hand closed on it. She heard, before she felt, the crack, because the bottle had been resting at an angle, and when she pulled it toward her, the base struck the edge of the step, and the glass broke, and the weak tea tincture ran down the black marble in a thin, shining line, and she watched it run, and she thought, that took me 11 days to make, and I will never make another. Guards! Your Majesty, escort Miss Voss to the dock. She got to her feet somehow. She gathered the pouches into the satchel. She left the broken bottle. 2 guards came down from the side of the dais, and they did not touch her, which she was grateful for, because if they had touched her, she thought she might have broken the way the bottle had broken. She turned. She walked the length of the hall. She made herself do one thing on the walk. She made herself look up. She looked up into the gallery, at the faces that had laughed at her, and she memorized as many of them as she could. She did not know why she was memorizing them. She only knew that she was going to need them later, in some shape she could not yet imagine, and she wanted to be sure she had them. At the door of the hall, she passed the dark-haired girl in the winter pine gown, and the dark-haired girl looked at her with something that was not pity and was not satisfaction, and the dark-haired girl, very quietly, very quickly, said, Hollowbrook. What? Walk north from Aldmere, not west. West is where they tell you to go. Go north. There's an old trapper's line that runs to the high country. You'll see cairns. Follow the cairns. Why? Because I had a cousin, the dark-haired girl said, and she didn't. And then the guards had her by the elbows, not rough, just firm. And then she was out of the hall, and then she was on the steps, and then she was on the path down to the dock, and the fog had not lifted off the river, and the ferryman was waiting, and he was the same ferryman who had brought her over in the morning, and he did not look at her when she stepped onto the plank. The ferry across to the north bank took 40 minutes. No one spoke to her. The other passengers were a delivery of barrels and a cart of hay, and a man with a crate of chickens who sat as far from her as the deck allowed, because word traveled fast on Verith Hold, and the word had already reached the dock. And everyone on the ferry knew that the woman in the brown wool had been stripped under the old rite, and no one wanted to be seen being kind to her. She sat on a coil of rope at the stern. She watched the island get smaller. She watched the torches on the dock shrink to pinpricks, and then to nothing. And she watched the dark shape of the hall on the hill fade into the fog. And she waited for herself to cry, because she thought that that was what she should be doing. And she found that she could not cry. Something else had moved into the place where the crying should have been. She did not know what it was yet. She would know it better later. For now it was only a small, hard, cold thing at the back of her throat, like a stone she had swallowed and could not bring back up. The ferry reached Aldmere at dusk. The ferryman threw the plank. He said, to the deck, not to her, north bank, as instructed. Thank you. Don't thank me. He spat over the side. I'm not doing you a favor. She stepped off the plank. The dock at Aldmere was a poor thing, 3 boards wide, half-rotted, built more for fishermen than for freight. There was a single lantern at the end of it, and beyond the lantern there was a road, and beyond the road there was forest, and beyond the forest there was nothing she had ever seen, because she had never in her life been north of the Black Ember. A man in a leather coat was waiting under the lantern. He had a clipboard. He had the same look as the scribe that morning, the look of a man performing a job he did not particularly enjoy and was not going to be particularly gentle about. Voss? Yes. Sign here. Sign what? Affirmation of exile. You were told the terms in the hall. I need your mark confirming that you received the terms and that you are entering the frontier of your own locomotion. My own. Locomotion. Walking. On your feet. Under your own power. Sign. She signed. He tore off a copy. He handed her the copy. He handed her also a small cloth sack, which surprised her. What's this? Bread. Half a wheel of cheese, flint, a striking iron. It's not in the law, but the North Bank officer puts it in the sack anyway. Has done for 20 years. Keep walking. The road forks in 2 miles. Take the West Fork. There's a settlement at Gray Mill. They'll take you in for the winter if you don't cause trouble. The West Fork. The West Fork. She looked at him. She looked at the road. She looked at the lantern. North, she said. There's a trapper's line. The officer's eyes narrowed. It was a small narrowing, a professional one. He had been doing this for 20 years, and he knew. She could see him know it, the exact moment when an exile stopped being a procedure and became a problem. The West Fork, he said again, more slowly, leads to Gray Mill. Gray Mill will take you in. The North Road leads to the High Country, and the High Country kills people, Miss Voss. It kills trained people. It will kill an herb woman from the fens in 11 days, maybe 13 if you're lucky with the weather. Take the West Fork. Thank you for the sack. Take the West Fork. She did not answer. She turned. She walked past the lantern and onto the road, and she walked into the dark, and the officer watched her go, and the ferry behind her was already pulling away from the dock, and when she reached the fork 2 miles later, she stopped in the middle of the road and stood there for what felt like a long time, looking at the 2 paths, one going west into the last orange light of the day, one going north into a wall of trees so black they seemed to have no depth at all. The cold thing at the back of her throat had gotten bigger. It had spread down into her chest and out into her hands, and when she flexed her fingers, she felt it there too, a low, slow, humming cold. And it was not fear, and it was not grief, and it was not any of the things she had expected to feel in the hours after a king had broken her in front of his court. It was something she did not yet have a name for. She shifted the satchel on her shoulder. She tightened the belt that had been her father's. She turned her face north, toward the trees, and she began to walk, and the forest closed over her the way water closes over a stone. Behind her on the river, the fog came down again, and Verith Hold went on with its selection, and a new name was called in the hall, and a new woman stepped forward, and within an hour no one in that hall was thinking of Elara Voss at all, which was, it would turn out, the single greatest mistake the court of Ronan Kyle had ever made. The trees did not care who she was. That was the first thing the forest taught her, and it taught her inside the first hour. The road thinned down to a track, and the track thinned down to something that was not even a track, just a groove in the moss where the feet of other people had pressed down over years, and the dark between the trunks was a dark she had not known existed. In Hollowbrook, the dark was a thing you could sit inside. Out here, the dark was a thing that sat inside you. She walked until the cloth sack on her shoulder felt like a stone. She walked until her right boot split along the seam at the heel and the cold started coming in at the foot. She walked until the moon came up over the ridge to her left and put a hard white line along the top of the pines, and only then did she stop, because she had reached a place where the track dropped off into a gully that she could not see the bottom of. And she knew, with the first real knowing she'd had since the ferry, that if she put one more foot forward in the dark, she was going to fall into that gully, and that would be the end of her. She sat down on a rock. She put the satchel beside her. She took out the half wheel of cheese, and she looked at it for a long time, and she did not eat it. She put it back. She put her hands under her arms because her hands had gone numb. The cold thing in her chest had not gone away. If anything, it had gotten colder, and she was beginning to suspect that it was not going to go away at all, and that whatever it was going to be with her for the rest of whatever life she had left. Eat the cheese, girl. She jerked so hard she nearly slid off the rock. The voice had come from her left, from a place where there had not been a person 10 seconds earlier, and there was a person there now. An old woman in a coat so patched that the original color of it was a matter of guesswork, standing not 6 feet from her with a bundle of something over one shoulder and a walking stick in her other hand. The old woman was looking at her the way a farmer looks at a sick chicken. Eat the cheese. You're going to freeze sitting on that rock. And if you freeze on that rock, the foxes will be on you before the sun's up, and I don't feel like hauling your bones off this trail in the morning. Eat. Elara ate. Her hands shook. The cheese tasted like nothing. She chewed it anyway because the old woman was standing there watching her chew it. Where are you headed? North, the cairns. The cairns, the old woman snorted. Who told you about the cairns? A girl, in the hall. What hall? Varith. Ah. The old woman set her bundle down. She did not seem surprised. One of those. One of what? Never mind. Stand up. I can't. Stand up, girl, or I leave you here. I'm not your mother. Elara stood up. The world swayed for a second and then settled. The old woman took her by the elbow, not gently, and turned her a quarter turn to the right, and pointed up the slope with the walking stick. That's not north, that's northeast. You've been walking wrong for 2 hours. The trail you want is up there, past that split pine. You see the split pine? Yes. Past that. There's a cairn the size of a small dog. After that one, there's another one, bigger. After the big one, there's a fork. Take the left fork. Don't take the right fork. The right fork goes to a mine that fell in 18 years ago, and the mine still smells of dead men. Left fork. There's a cabin. Whose cabin? Mine, when I'm in it. Yours, tonight. I'll be behind you in an hour or two. There's wood stacked by the door. There's a kettle on the hook. Don't touch the jar on the top shelf. Why? Because I said don't touch it. What's your name, girl? Elara. Elara what? Voss. The old woman's eyes went flat for half a second. It was such a small thing that Elara almost missed it, the way a pond goes flat when a fish turns underneath it. Then the eyes came back. Voss, the old woman said, of Hollowbrook. You know the name. I knew your grandmother. Walk, girl. You've got an hour of hill in front of you, and I've got errands that won't wait. What's your name? Mara. Walk. Elara walked. She looked back once, 20 paces up the slope, and the old woman was gone. Not walked away, gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustle of the coat, just the place where she had been, empty. The moonlight on the moss where her boots had pressed it down. The cabin was where Mara had said it would be. Elara reached it 2 hours after midnight, and she fell through the door more than walked through it, and the kettle was on the hook, and the wood was by the door, and she built a fire with hands that were not fully under her control, and she sat in front of the fire until the feeling came back into her fingers, and then she slept on the floor in her clothes, and she did not dream. Mara was sitting at the table when she woke up. There was light at the window. There was a bowl of something hot in front of the place across from Mara. There was a second bowl steaming at Mara's elbow, and Mara was spooning it into her mouth with the steady, unhurried attention of a person who had been eating one-handed breakfast for 60 years. Sit. Elara sat. Eat. Elara ate. It was a porridge, coarse, with something in it that tasted like cured meat and something else that tasted green. It was the best thing she had ever put in her mouth. She ate the whole bowl and she did not remember chewing any of it. How long can I stay? 3 nights. I don't keep strays longer than that. After 3 nights, either they move on, or I find out why they won't. And if I find out why they won't, I stop liking them. 3 nights. 3 nights. Then you go. Where? That's your problem. I don't know the country. Then you learn it. I'll teach you what I can in 3 days. After that, you're on your own. The cairns go up another 40 miles. There are trappers. There's a valley with an old sheep station where a man named Hask keeps a cabin in the summer. You don't want to meet Hask. There's a cave system 2 days east where the ice doesn't melt. You don't want to be in there when the thaw comes. Other than that, there's you and the country and whatever you brought in that satchel. I brought herbs. Mara set her spoon down. She considered Elara across the table. She considered her the way a woman considers a horse she has been asked to buy, with the full intention of finding the flaw. What did your grandmother tell you about your line? Nothing. She died when I was 6. What did your mother tell you? She said her grandmother was from House Velen. She said the house fell. She said there was no point in talking about it. What did your father tell you? That my mother's line had a touch for green things. That it skipped generations. That it hadn't come to me and probably wouldn't, and I shouldn't go looking for it. Your father was a careful man. My father was a dead man. He died when I was 14 Darmeet. And yet you can boil a fever down. And yet you know which side of the yarrow to cut. And yet you were carrying, last night in that satchel, a tincture of moon thistle that I have not seen properly made in 30 years. And I know it was properly made because I smelled it on you when you came through my door. Who taught you to make moon thistle tincture? Elara Voss. No one taught me. I read a book. What book? An old one. It was in my father's chest after he died. What did the book look like? Black, leather, no title on the spine. There was a plant pressed between two of the pages, something with 5 petals, red on the outside, white on the inside. Mara was very still. Where's the book now? In my satchel. I brought it. Give it to me. Elara got up. She fetched the satchel. She took out the book. It was not a big book. It was the size of her hand, and the leather of the cover was soft with age and with the oil of many fingers, and there were 2 small leather cords to keep it closed when it was not being read. She set it on the table between them. Mara did not pick it up. Mara looked at it the way a woman looks at a snake that has come into her kitchen. Your father had this. Yes. He told you to use it. He told me not to. But you used it. I was hungry. There was a winter we had nothing. The book had a recipe for a bread made with ground pine bark, and I made it, and I didn't die. And after that I read more of the book. How much more? Most of it. Have you made all of it? No. Some of the recipes don't make sense to me. Some of them need things I don't know the names of. Star water. Blood of the white goat at the turn of the year. I thought they were jokes, or old words for things that had other names now. They are old words for things that have other names now. What are the other names? I'm not going to tell you. Why not? Because you don't know what this book is, girl, and you don't know what it costs to use it, and I'm trying very hard across this table to decide whether I send you out of my cabin in the morning with a head full of something I shouldn't have put there, or whether I send you out of my cabin in the morning without it, knowing you'll find the rest on your own anyway, and probably get yourself killed doing it. Mara, eat your porridge. What is the book? Eat your porridge, Elara. She ate her porridge. Mara watched her eat. When she was done, Mara took both bowls to the washing stand and rinsed them with water from the kettle, and then Mara came back to the table, and Mara sat down, and Mara put both her hands flat on the table on either side of the book, and did not touch the book. Your line, Mara said, was burned out of the records 4 generations ago. You know that part. Yes. What you don't know is why. House Vallon was not a large house. It was not a wealthy house. It did not hold much land. What it had, what made the crowns of the river valleys both court it and fear it, was a talent. A specific talent, Elara, and it was a talent your mother's grandmother's mother carried. And her mother before her, and her mother before her, all the way back to a woman whose name nobody alive remembers. And the talent was a touch for the thing between life and death. Do you understand me? No. A healer can bring a fever down. A good healer can set a bone. A great healer can bring a man back from the edge of dying if she gets to him fast enough. What your line could do was walk up to a field of blighted wheat and put her hands on the soil and make the blight turn around and walk back out of the grain. What your line could do was take a corpse 3 days cold and make its nails keep growing. There's a word for what your line could do, and I am not going to say the word out loud in my cabin because words of that kind have a habit of coming when they are called. But the word is in that book. It is on the 2nd page. You've read it. I thought it was a name. It is a name. It's the name of the thing. The book is a book of the thing. And your father, Elara, your careful, careful father, kept it in a chest because he knew you were the first child of your line in 4 generations who was going to be able to read it. And he was hoping, the way a careful man hopes, that you would never be hungry enough, or angry enough, or alone enough to open it. Elara looked at the book. It looked the same as it had looked 5 minutes ago. A small black book with 2 leather cords, on a scarred wooden table in a cabin she had been in for less than a day. I'm not, she said. Not what? Not angry enough. To do whatever you think the book does. Mara laughed. It was a short laugh, and there was no joy in it. Girl, she said, you came up my trail last night with the ashes of a public stripping on your face and a cold inside you that I could feel from 30 paces. I don't need to wonder if you're angry. You haven't caught up to yourself yet, that's all. Give it a month. Give it a winter. Then we'll see what you open and what you don't. The 3 days went fast. Mara taught her how to read the bark of a pine for the direction of water. Mara taught her that the mushrooms with the white gills were the ones that would kill her, and the ones with the brown gills were the ones that would feed her. And then Mara showed her two exceptions to that rule, and Elara wrote them down in the margin of the black book with a stub of charcoal, because Mara would not give her ink. Mara taught her how to set a snare for a hare in a place where a hare would not expect a snare, and how to clean the hare when it was caught, and how to save the guts for the next snare because the smell of hare gut would pull another hare within a day. Mara showed her 3 places where she could winter in the high country if she was willing to work. One was Grey Mill. Mara did not recommend Grey Mill. One was a logging camp 3 days north called Wolf's Tooth. Mara did not recommend Wolf's Tooth either. The third was a settlement called the Rookery, at the edge of the old burn, where a woman named Senna ran a hall for travelers and did not ask too many questions of the people who came through her door. "Go to Senna," Mara said on the 3rd morning, at the door of the cabin, with the sun just up and Elara's satchel on her shoulder and a second sack now, a heavier one, with oats in it and dried meat and a small iron pot Mara had put in without being asked. "Senna will put you to work. The work will be hard. She won't be kind to you, but she won't be cruel, and the Rookery is far enough off the river that nothing from Vareth Hold will reach you for at least a year, and a year is what you need." "A year for what?" "A year to stop flinching when a man speaks." Elara looked at her. "I don't flinch." "You flinch, girl. Every time I raise my voice, you flinch. You don't know you're doing it. A year at the Rookery and you'll stop. And then you'll know what you want to do." "What if what I want to do is go back?" "Then you go back. But you won't want to yet. Not after a year, 2 years maybe, 3. When you want to, come find me first. Don't go running down the river with your book under your arm thinking you're ready. You will not be ready. Will you be here? I'll be somewhere. Ask for Mara of the Cairns. Someone will know." Elara stood on the step. She had not cried yet. She had not cried in the hall, and she had not cried on the ferry, and she had not cried on the trail, and she had not cried in any of the 3 nights on Mara's floor, and she was not going to cry now, and she was about to thank the old woman, and she could not get the words out of her throat. And Mara, who seemed to know this, put a hand on her shoulder for one short, hard second, and then turned her around and pushed her off the step. "Walk, Voss. The light's burning." She walked. Eat. The Rookery was 4 days' hard travel north and east, over a ridge that nearly broke her, through a pass where the wind came off the ice field above, with a sound like a knife on a whetstone, and down into a bowl-shaped valley where the snow had already come early and lay a finger deep on everything. The settlement sat at the bottom of the bowl, 24 log buildings huddled around a stockade, smoke going up from every other roof, a single road leading out to the north and another leading out to the south, and she came down into it on the afternoon of the 4th day, with her right boot wrapped in a strip of hare hide, and her lips cracked and her face burned red by the wind. The woman Senna was easy to find because everyone Elara asked pointed her to the same long hall at the center of the stockade. Senna was not what Elara had expected. Senna was not old. Senna was maybe 35, a broad woman with a scar across her upper lip and a braid of black hair so thick it looked like a rope, and she was standing on a stool behind a counter when Elara came in, hanging strings of dried peppers from a hook in the ceiling beam. "Don't stand in the doorway. You're letting the heat out." "Sorry." "Close the door behind you. Fully, all the way. That's it. Now, what do you want?" "Mara sent me." Senna stopped hanging peppers. She got down from the stool. She wiped her hands on a cloth tucked into her belt. She looked Elara up and down, not fast, not slow. She took about 10 seconds, and at the end of the 10 seconds, she said, "Mara doesn't send people. She sent me." "She doesn't send people, girl. In 20 years, she has sent me 4, and 3 of them are buried out back because Mara sends me the ones she thinks might make it, and she is usually wrong. What's your name?" "Elara Voss." "Voss?" "Yes." "Of what?" "Of Hollowbrook." "Hollowbrook's a fen. We don't take fen folk as a rule. They can't take the cold." "I made it here." "You made it here with a boot wrapped in a hare. You're not walking out of here without a better boot, and I'm not going to be the one that gives it to you. What can you do?" "I know plants. So does everyone. I can set a fever. I can bring down a swelling. I can clean a wound so it doesn't take a leg off a man." "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you wash?" "Yes." Can you hold your tongue? Yes. We'll see. Back room. There's a pallet in the corner. Blankets clean. You eat what the hall eats. You work where I put you. You pay no rent for 30 days. After 30 days, we talk about rent. You cause trouble in my hall, you're out by nightfall. And nightfall at the rookery in winter is a death sentence, Voss, and I don't soften that for anybody. Clear. Clear. Then get to the back room and stop dripping melt on my floor. The back room was not a room. It was a closet with a pallet in it. The pallet was, as promised, clean. The blanket was wool and smelled like a horse. Elara set her satchel down. She set the sack from Mara down. She sat on the pallet. She put her face in her hands for the first time since the hall at Verith, and she still did not cry because the thing that had come into her on the ferry had not gone away and was not going to go away. And crying, she was beginning to understand, belonged to a person she had been before the old rite was spoken over her, and that person was not the person sitting on the pallet. She wiped her face. She got up. She went back out into the hall and she asked Senna what needed doing, and Senna put her to washing pots, and she washed pots until her hands cracked open across the knuckles. And when the hall cleared out at midnight, Senna looked at her hands and made a sound that was not kind but was not unkind, and handed her a small clay pot of something that smelled like tallow and rosemary, and said, "Put that on them. Not too much. It's expensive." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not running a charity. You work tomorrow whether your hands bleed or not." "Yes." "Sleep." She slept. The winter at the rookery was the hardest winter of her life, and by the middle of it she understood that Mara had sent her there not because Senna was kind, but because Senna was exactly, precisely, unvaryingly fair. Senna did not like her. Senna did not dislike her. Senna assigned her work, and Senna paid her attention when the work was wrong, and Senna paid her no attention at all when the work was right. And over the course of 3 months, Elara learned that this was a thing she had never had in her life before. A person who measured her by what her hands did and by nothing else. She washed pots for the first month. The second month, Senna put her on the food line, ladling stew into bowls for the trappers and the loggers and the occasional half-starved traveler who came down out of the pass. And she learned to ladle without looking at the faces, because the faces of men who had been alone in the woods for weeks at a time were not faces a woman wanted to study. The third month, a logger came in with a gash down his forearm from a slipped axe, and the man who usually did the stitching at the rookery was 2 valleys over at a funeral. And Senna looked at Elara and said, "You said you could clean a wound." "Yes." "Do it then." She did it. The logger was a man named Breck, enormous, bearded, silent. He watched her clean the gash with a preparation she made at the table from willow, yarrow, and a pinch of the salt Senna kept for curing meat, and then he watched her stitch the gash with a bone needle and a thread of gut. And when she was done, he looked at the work, and he looked at her, and he said, "You've done this before. On my father, when he was dying. Did it work?" "No." He stood up. He flexed the arm. He nodded. "Good work anyway." He dropped a silver piece on the table. Senna picked it up. Senna looked at Elara. "That one's yours." "It's yours. You pay me by the month." "That one's yours, Voss. That's the rule. Healing silver's healer's silver. Put it in your pocket and don't argue with me." She put it in her pocket. Word traveled. That was the thing about the rookery, which she had not expected. For a settlement at the edge of nowhere, word traveled fast, because in winter there was nothing else to do but talk. By the 4th month, there was a bench outside the hall where men sat waiting for her in the mornings. Not every morning, but 2 or 3 mornings a week. And the reasons were the reasons men in a logging country had: a cut, a burn, a cough that would not go, a tooth that had been hurting for a season, a foot that had gone black at the tip. She worked on all of them. She saved most of them. She lost 2. One of them was the foot. She took the foot because the foot had gone past saving by the time the man had brought it to her, and he did not die on her table, but he died a week later of the shock. And she walked out behind the hall that night, and she stood in the snow, and she waited for the cold inside her to take her the way the cold outside her was threatening to. And it did not. It held. It sat at the back of her throat where it had been since the ferry, and it did not take her, and she understood, standing in that snow, that it was not the cold of dying. It was the cold of something else, something that had come to her, and that was waiting. She began to read the book again at night. She had not opened the book since Mara's cabin. She had been afraid to. She was still afraid to. But after the foot, and after the man died, she took the book out of the satchel and she set it on the pallet in the back room with the candle beside it, and she opened it to the page that had the word on it, the word Mara would not say out loud. And she read the word, and she read what came after it, and what came after it was not a spell, she realized, not in the sense she had always thought of the word. It was a method. It was a list of observations, written out by someone who had watched plants for a very long time and had noticed that there were things plants did that they were not supposed to be able to do, and there were things that could be done to plants to encourage them to do those things. And the things could be done by a person with a particular kind of touch. And the touch was a thing you could feel or you could not feel. And if you could feel it, the method said, you would already know. She put her hand on the table beside her pallet. She felt. She felt the cold in her chest. She felt the cold move down her arm, down her wrist, down into her palm, and out of her palm into the wood. And the wood was dead and had been dead for years. It had been a beam once and a tree before that, and under her hand, for the length of a single breath, she felt the dead wood answer. It was not a large thing. It was not a dramatic thing. There was no shine, no smoke, no sound. It was the feeling of a thing that had been sleeping, turning over in its sleep. She jerked her hand off the table. She sat very still. She looked at her hand. It looked the same as it had looked 30 seconds ago. She looked at the beam. The beam looked the same. She put her hand on the table again. She felt for it again. It was there. It was still there. It had not gone anywhere. It had been there. She understood. The whole time she had been at the rookery, and probably longer than that, probably since Hollowbrook, probably since before Hollowbrook, probably since she had been a girl at her mother's skirt pulling yarrow out of the ditch and making her mother laugh with the size of the root. "Oh," she said out loud in the candlelight, alone in the back room of Senna's hall, with the wind making the shutters tick. "Oh." And then quietly, to herself, to the book, to the dead wood under her hand, "I don't want it." The dead wood did not care. It had been waiting for 4 generations, and it was patient, and it would wait longer, and it would be there the next time she put her hand on it, and the next time, and the next. She closed the book. She did not sleep that night. Mashayan. She did not tell Senna. She did not tell anyone. She worked, and she healed, and she ladled stew, and she scrubbed pots, and in the second winter, which was easier than the first because she knew the rookery now and the rookery knew her, she began, very quietly, very carefully, to practice. She practiced on things that were already dead. She practiced on a strip of bark Senna had thrown into the fire and that she pulled back out. She practiced on a sprig of rosemary that had dried on a rafter. She practiced on a log in the stockade wall that had a crack running up it, and the crack, over the course of a month, closed by the width of a hair. She did not tell anyone about the log. She walked past the log every day. She watched the crack close. She did not know what it meant that the crack was closing. She only knew that it was. And then one morning in the late spring of the second year, when the ice was going out of the river down in the bottom of the valley, and the first of the trappers were starting to come down out of the high country with the winter's furs, a rider came up the south road into the rookery, and the rider was not a trapper, and the rider was not a traveler, and the rider had the silver of Verithold on his collar. Elara was at the food line when he came into the hall. She did not see him come in. She heard Senna, behind her at the counter, go still. Senna's going still was not a thing that happened often. Elara turned her head. The rider was at the counter. He was a young man, road-tired, his cheeks windburned, his black coat stained down the front with mud. He had taken his gloves off and set them on the counter, and he was speaking to Senna in a low voice. And Senna was listening with her chin down and her arms folded, and the rider was saying something about a list. Elara could not hear the words. She could hear the shape of them, and the shape of them was an official shape, the shape words took when a man was reading them off a piece of paper or reciting them from memory. And she set the ladle down very carefully, and she stepped back from the food line, and she turned her face toward the wall, and she pretended to be wiping down the shelf of clay bowls, and her hands were steady, which surprised her. "Voss of Hollowbrook," the rider was saying. "Elara Voss, 22 years of age at the time of exile, now 24. Height, tall for a woman. Hair, dark. Last known heading, north from Aldmere. The Crown has reason to believe she may have survived the winter, and the Crown is, as a matter of formality, extending an offer of repatriation to all exiles of the right who can be located within a window of 3 years. Repatriation? Yes, mistress. Why? That's not my place to say, mistress. Try anyway. I don't know, mistress. Is she in trouble? No, mistress, or, not that I've been told. The offer is a formality. If she's in your ledger, I'm to record the fact and move on. I'm not to take her with me. I'm not authorized to take her with me. I'm a scribe, mistress. I carry a list. And if I told you I've never heard the name, then I'd mark her as not located and ride on at first light. Senna was quiet for a long moment. Elara did not turn around. She was holding a clay bowl in her right hand, and she was turning it, slowly, wiping the rim with her cloth, and she could feel the cold in her chest, and it was not moving, it was only waiting. I've never heard the name, Senna said. Thank you, mistress. You'll stay for the evening meal. I'll stay, mistress. Thank you. Sit by the fire, someone will bring you stew. Elara carried the bowl to the shelf. She set it on the shelf. She did not look at the rider. She walked, at a pace that was not fast and was not slow, through the kitchen, out the back door, and she stood in the yard behind the hall with her hands flat against the log wall, and she breathed in and out through her nose until the cold in her chest stopped pulsing. Senna came out after her. Senna closed the door behind her. Senna leaned her back against the wall beside Elara and folded her arms and looked up at the sky, which was a high clean blue, the first clean blue of the spring. Voss? Yes? You want to tell me anything? No. You sure? Yes. He's a scribe, not a huntsman. He'll write what I told him, and he'll ride out in the morning, and he won't be back. But I want you to understand something. The Crown is not in the habit of extending formalities of this kind. The Crown is not in the habit of putting riders on the spring roads to ask after the names of exiles. Something has changed down there, Voss. I don't know what it is, and it's not my business. But if they're looking for you, even as a formality, there is a reason. And the reason will find you eventually, whether you want it to or not. I know. You know. I've been feeling it. Something's wrong. Down the river. I don't know how I know. Senna turned her head. She looked at Elara for a long moment, the way Mara had looked at her across the table that first morning in the cabin. And Elara understood, not in words, that Senna had been told something about her by Mara, years ago, and had been watching for the thing she had been told about, and was, at this moment, seeing it. Well, Senna said, whatever it is you've been doing in that back room at night, Voss. I don't want to know. I have run this hall for 14 years and I do not want to know. But when you go, and you're going to go, girl, you're going to go before the year is out. Don't look at me like that. I can see it on your face. When you go, you take the long road. You don't take the river road. You don't go back down through Aldmere. You go east through the burn and you come down into the valleys from the side they won't be watching. Do you understand me? Yes. And Voss? Yes. Whatever it is they did to you in that hall, whatever they took from you, whatever they're going to be sorry for. Senna turned her face away. She did not finish the sentence. She pushed off the wall and she opened the door, and she went back into her hall. And Elara stood in the yard with her hands flat on the logs and the cold in her chest and the high clean blue of the first spring sky over her. And she understood that Senna had just in her way given her permission for a thing, and that the thing was not a small thing, and that she was going to do it anyway, whether permission had been given or not. She stayed at the rookery through the summer and into the second autumn. She did not rush. Mara had told her a year, and she gave it 3, because Mara had said she would not be ready. And Elara, who had learned by then the exact shape of every lie she had ever told herself, was not going to be ready one season before she had to be. She read the book every night. She practiced. The log with the crack in the stockade wall closed all the way by midsummer. And in the autumn, she put her hand on a dead sapling behind the hall, and she felt the cold in her chest go down into the roots of it. And 3 days later, when no one was watching, the sapling put out a single green leaf, and she looked at the leaf for a long time, and she did not feel proud, and she did not feel afraid, and she only felt, at last, the thing the cold in her chest had been waiting to become, which was ready. She left the rookery on a clear, cold morning in the third autumn. Senna gave her a new pair of boots, and a heavier coat, and a bow with 6 arrows, and a small leather wallet of silver that Elara tried to refuse, and that Senna shoved into the top of her satchel and walked away from without a word. Breck the logger, who had become in those 3 years something like a friend, rode with her as far as the edge of the burn and then turned his horse around and said, not looking at her, "Whatever you're going down there to do, Voss." "Yes, don't die." "I don't plan to." "Good." He rode back toward the rookery. She watched him go until he was a dark point on the white of the new snow, and then she turned her face east, toward the burn and the valleys beyond it, and she shouldered the satchel and she started walking. Somewhere down the Black Ember, in a hall she had not seen in 3 years, a king who had called her weak was about to find out what the land had been building, quietly, all this time, in the place he had thrown her. She just did not know yet how bad it had already gotten. The burn took 11 days to cross, and it was worse than the mountains had been, because the mountains at least had a shape. The burn had no shape. It was a country that had been a forest once, and then had stopped being a forest in a single bad summer 9 years before, and had never decided what to be after. The ground was black. The trees that still stood were black. The trees that had fallen lay across each other in long black stacks, and the snow that had come the week before lay on top of the black, in a way that made the whole country look like something half erased, a place where a hand had begun to rub out the drawing and then gotten tired. Elara made 15 miles a day when the weather let her, and 4 miles a day when it did not. She slept under deadfall. She ate what she had in the sack from Senna, and she did not shoot any of her 6 arrows because the burn had almost no game in it, and she did not want to waste a shot on a crow. On the 5th night she heard wolves, which she had expected, and on the 7th night she heard something else, which she had not. She was crouched over a small fire in the lee of a leaning trunk, boiling water in the iron pot, and the sound came from the north, not close, maybe half a mile off, and it was not a wolf. It was a long, low keening, the sound a woman might make if you took a woman's grief and drew it out for 2 full minutes on a single note, and it went up at the end, the way a question goes up, and then it stopped, and the burn was quiet again. She did not sleep that night. She kept the fire low, and she sat with the bow across her knees, and she waited for the sound to come again, and it did not. And in the morning she packed up and walked on. And she did not tell herself what the sound had been, because she was not yet willing to say the word, even inside her own head. She came down out of the burn on the 11th afternoon, onto the back slope of a ridge she recognized, because from the top of the ridge on a clear day you could see, a long way south and west, the gray shine of the Black Ember, and there it was. The river she had been put out on 3 years before, running between its banks as if nothing had happened. She stood on the ridge for a long time. The cold in her chest was not cold anymore. It had become something else in the months at the rookery, something more like a low hum, a thing she could feel with her palms when she turned them down, and she turned them down now, over the country in front of her, and what she felt coming up off the country was not right. She could not have put it in words at first. It was the way the land felt under the ridge. It felt thin. It felt used. It felt like a cloth that had been wrung too many times. And when she squinted down into the valleys, she could see the thing her hands were telling her, because the valleys were the wrong color. It was late autumn. The valleys should have been brown and gold and a little red where the sumac caught the sun. They were gray. They were gray the way old bread is gray. She had never seen country look like that, and she stood on the ridge and she watched it, and she understood, before she had any evidence at all, that something down there had been going wrong for longer than the 3 years she had been gone. She came down off the ridge slowly. She avoided the roads. She had Senna's advice ringing in her ears. East, through the burn, down into the valleys from the side they won't be watching, and she followed it past the point of strict necessity, because even off the roads the country had a watched quality to it, a feeling of being overseen, and she did not want to be seen yet. She had not yet decided what she was going to do. She had told herself, at the rookery, a dozen different stories about what she was going back for, and none of them had survived the burn. The burn had taken the stories and burned them down to the one true thing under them, which was that she was going back because the cold in her chest was pulling her back, and because she had memorized the faces in the gallery of that hall 3 years ago, and she was finally ready to look at them again. On the 3rd night down off the ridge, she came to a farm. It was a small farm, 1 barn, 1 house, a sheep pen in a state of bad repair. A well with the bucket gone from the rope. There was smoke coming from the chimney of the house, but it was not the smoke of a good fire. It was the thin, pale smoke of a fire that had been fed the wrong wood for weeks. She watched the farm from the tree line for an hour. No one came out. No dog barked. At the end of the hour, the door of the house opened, and a man came out, and the man was bent nearly double, and he walked with the careful, slow walk of a man who had been hungry for a long time. And he went to the well, and he stood over the well, and he looked down into it for a full minute, and then he turned around and he went back into the house, and the door closed behind him, and no bucket had come up. She came out of the tree line. She knocked on the door. It took a long time for the door to open. When it opened, it was opened by a woman who was not old but looked old, and the woman looked at Elara and at the satchel and at the bow across Elara's back, and the woman's face did not change, because hunger had taken the changes out of it. "We've got nothing." "I'm not asking for anything." "Then go. I'm a healer. I've got oats. I've got a little dried meat. I've got a tincture for fever if there's fever in the house. I'll trade for a roof tonight." The woman looked at her for a long time. "You a witch?" "No." "You smell like one." "I'm a healer, that's all." "There's fever in the house." "Let me see." The woman stepped aside. Elara went in. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. The room was dim and warm in the thin, unhappy way the smoke outside had suggested. And there were 3 pallets on the floor, and on the pallets there were 3 children. And on the bed in the back corner there was a man. The man she had watched go to the well, and he was the woman's husband, and all 4 of them had the same gray-lipped look. And the youngest of the children, a girl of maybe 6, was not quite breathing the way a person was supposed to breathe. Elara knelt by the girl first. "How long?" 4 days. The boys started yesterday. My husband, he hasn't been right for weeks. It's not the same thing. His is something else." "Water." "The well's gone bad. We've been boiling creek water. It isn't the water that did it. It's the bread." "The bread?" "The flour we bought at Gray Mill last month. Half the valley got it. Half the valley's down. Gray Mill got it from the barges out of Corin, and Corin had a bad harvest, and they dried the bad grain and ground it anyway, and nobody caught it until people started getting sick, and by then, ergot." "What?" "The fungus. On the grain. It's ergot, mistress. I've seen it once. In Hollowbrook. A boy got into the bad rye, and we nearly lost him." "Can you fix it?" Elara looked at the girl on the pallet. She put her hand on the girl's forehead. The cold in her chest moved quietly, down her arm, into her palm, and she felt the girl under her hand the way she had felt the dead wood in the rookery, and what she felt was not good. The girl was very thin. The girl was very far along. The poison was not a fresh poison. It had been working in the girl for days, and her small organs were tired, and the cold in Elara's chest pushed gently against the tiredness, and the tiredness pushed back, not out of malice, but out of simple exhaustion, the way a fire pushes back against a palm. She pulled her hand off the girl. She opened her satchel. She did not have what she needed. She had the basics, the willow, the yarrow, the moon thistle, the valerian, but for ergot you needed something to pull the poison, and she did not have it in the satchel, and her eyes went around the room, and she saw on a shelf above the hearth a braid of garlic, and she saw, beside the door, a dried bundle of what she thought for a second was thyme, and which turned out to be hyssop. And her hands began to work. "Boil water, as much as you've got wood for." "The creek water's fine, you were right. It wasn't the water." "What are you—" "Boil water, garlic, hyssop. I've got a powder in here that will settle the belly. It's not going to be a cure. It's going to be a start. I need you to keep them drinking, all 4 of them, every 20 minutes, a mouthful at a time, for the rest of the night." "Mistress, boil the water." The woman boiled the water. Elara worked through the night. She worked on the girl first, because the girl was closest to the edge. And when she had the girl settled, she worked on the 2 boys. And when she had the boys settled, she worked on the husband. And the husband was the one she was most worried about. Not because the ergot was worst in him, but because there was a second thing in him, a thing underneath the ergot, something slower and older. And when she put her hand on his chest and felt into him with the cold, she realized that he had been sick for a long time, a year maybe 2, and that nobody had ever come to look, and that there was nothing in her satchel that was going to fix the slower thing. She did what she could for the faster thing, and she left the slower thing alone, because she was not going to take it on tonight. And at dawn, the girl was sleeping properly, and the boys were sleeping properly, and the husband was in a bad way, but no worse than he had been when she came in. And the woman was sitting at the table with her hands around a mug of the same boiled creek water. And she was looking at Elara across the table the way a person looks at a thing they have not yet decided is real. What do I owe you? Nothing. That's not how it works. It's how it works tonight. Mistress, listen to me. The flour from Grey Mill is poison. Anyone you know who's got any of it left needs to throw it in the fire. Not the pigs, not the chickens. In the fire. How far are we from Grey Mill? 2 days, maybe 3, the way the roads are now. What do you mean, the way the roads are now? You've been away. Yes. How long? 3 years. Oh, child. The woman set the mug down. Oh, child. The roads are not the way the roads were 3 years ago. The roads now. She made a small motion with her hand, a helpless motion. The roads now are not roads. The barges on the Ember haven't run on schedule since midsummer. Half the pack captains have stopped taking the king's coin because the king's coin doesn't spend the way it used to. The grain stores in the lower valleys have been opened twice by hungry men, and the king has hanged the hungry men, and the hangings have not fixed the grain. There's talk? There is talk, which I will not repeat in this house because my husband gets frightened, that the king's brother has been put out, the way you'd put a dog out, and that the captains who used to answer to the brother are answering to nobody now, and are riding where they like, and taking what they like. There is talk that what, mistress? That the land itself has turned, that it is not giving what it gave, that the harvest this year was 1/3 of what it should have been, and the harvest next year is going to be less. That a king who lets the land go sour is not a king anymore, whatever he calls himself. Elara sat very still. Who says those things? Everyone says them, quietly, in their own kitchens. There was a priestess came through here in the summer from up the North River, and she said, the woman paused, and she looked at Elara across the table, and she said it anyway. She said there was a woman on the land who could mend it, and that the king had thrown the woman into the frontier 3 years ago, and the land had gone with her, and the land would not come back until she did. The air in the room went thin. She said that. In my kitchen, sitting where you're sitting now. What else did she say? She said the woman had been called weak at the court, and that it had been the weakness of the men that called her that, not her own. She said the woman had a name. She said she wasn't to say the name out loud, that nobody was. She said the woman was coming back. Did you believe her? No. Do you believe her now? I haven't decided yet, Miss Healer. Have another mug of water. You look like you've walked a long way. They sat at the table for a little while longer without speaking, and outside the window the gray of the valley began to take the first of the morning light, and Elara understood, sitting there, that a thing had already happened which was bigger than her, that the valleys had been telling a story about her while she was at the rookery, and that the story had gotten out in front of her, and that when she walked down into the lower country, she was not going to be walking as a woman returning from exile. She was going to be walking as a thing people had already begun to call by another name, and she was not sure yet what that name was going to be, and she was not sure yet whether she wanted it. She stayed at the farm 4 more days. The girl came back. The boys came back. The husband did not get worse. On the 5th morning, she left them a pouch of the powder that had settled their bellies, and she left them 2 of the 6 arrows from the bow, and she left them a list of 3 plants to watch for along the creek. And the woman walked her to the edge of the yard and stood beside her with her arms wrapped around herself and said, not looking at Elara, "If it is you, mistress, if it is you they're talking about, be careful. There are men in the low country now who are listening for you, not the king's men. Worse than the king's men. Men who've decided the king is done and who want to be the ones who find the woman first. You understand?" I understand. Walk in the tree line, don't walk in the open. If you see riders, lie down in the ditch and don't move. There are scouts, mistress. There are scouts. Thank you. Don't thank me. Walk. Elara walked. She found the first of the dead villages on the 7th day south of the farm. It was a small place, 20 houses, a well in the middle, a chapel of the river spirits at the north end with the roof half fallen in, which was normal, and with the doors pulled off their hinges, which was not. She walked down the main street and she counted the houses and she counted the signs of life, and there were no signs of life. There were also no bodies. The village had been left, not killed. The doors of the houses stood open. Chairs had been knocked over and not set right. In one house, a pot still hung over a hearth that had long since gone cold, and there was food in the pot dried to a hard black disk. And the pot itself was good iron and had not been taken. And people who leave a place do not leave good iron behind unless they are leaving very fast. She went to the well. She dropped a pebble. It took a long time to hit the water. She pulled a bucket up on the rope that somebody had left threaded through the pulley, and she looked at the water, and the water was clear. It was drinkable. It had not been poisoned. The village had been abandoned for some other reason. She stood in the square, and she put her hands down toward the ground, and she felt into the dirt, and the dirt felt back at her, and what she felt was a wrongness that was not a single wrongness, but many small ones, layered. The fields outside the village had not been planted that year. The orchard to the west of the chapel had not been pruned. The sheep pens were empty, not slaughtered, but empty, the gates hanging, the straw gone to rot. The village had been left in a slow cascade. First the livestock, then the young men, then the families with children, then, at the end, whoever had not had anywhere else to go, and then those too had gone, and nobody had come to reopen the chapel, and nobody had come to take the good iron out of the hearth. She slept in the chapel. She built a small fire in the wreckage of the altar, and she ate cold cheese, and she read a page of the book, and the page was a page she had read 100 times, a page about the knitting of roots, and she read it again anyway, because when she was frightened, the book was the only thing that steadied her. She was past Grey Mill by the 9th day. She did not go into Grey Mill. She went around it. She did not want to see it. She had been told too much about it by the woman at the farm and by the 2 tinkers she had passed on the track the day before. And if Grey Mill had become what the tinkers said it had become, she did not trust herself to go into it with the cold in her chest the way it was now, because the cold was not steady anymore. It pulsed. It pulsed harder when she came near places that had been hurt. And Grey Mill had been hurt for a long time, and she was saving the cold, she understood, for a thing that was coming, and she did not want to spend any of it early. On the 11th day out of the farm, she came into country she knew. It was not country she had been in, but it was country she recognized the shape of. She had come down a long way south now, and the black ember had bent east, and she was on the low ground between the river and the foothills. And she began that morning to see, in the distance, thin lines of smoke that were the right color for cooking fires and for forges. And she began to pass carts, and she began to pass once, twice, 3 times, men on horses. And the men on the horses were not the king's men. She did not know whose men they were. They wore no colors. They wore leather, like trappers, but the leather was too clean to be trappers' leather, and the horses were too well kept, and each man carried a crossbow across his back in a fitted sheath. And crossbows were not a weapon of the frontier. They were a weapon of cities. And she remembered what the woman at the farm had said about scouts. And the second time she saw a rider, she did what the woman had told her, and she lay down in a ditch by the roadside, and she put her coat over her head, and she did not move, and the rider passed 10 feet from her and did not turn. The third rider was more trouble. The third rider was not on the road. The third rider was in the tree line, and she came on him going around a hollow, and he was standing with his back to her, holding his horse by the rein, and he was looking down into the hollow at something she could not see. He heard her before she saw him all the way, and he turned, and his hand went for the crossbow across his back, and she did a thing she did not plan. She had the bow off her shoulder in one motion. She had an arrow knocked before his hand touched the crossbow. She did not pull the string. She stood with the arrow resting on the bow and her eyes on his throat, and her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "Don't." The man stopped. He looked at her. He was young. He was no older than she was. He had a fair beard and a long face, and his eyes went from the arrow to her face and back to the arrow, and he took his hand slowly off the crossbow, and he held both hands out to the sides. "Easy, traveler." "Name." "What?" "Your name." "Kellen." "Whose rider are you, Kellen?" "I'm not a rider. I've seen 3 of you today, and you all wear the same coat. Whose man are you?" "Who's asking?" "The woman with the arrow." He smiled. It was a small, tired smile, and it did not reach his eyes. "Lady Varen." "I don't know the name." You've been gone. How do you know I've been gone? I don't. It's a guess. You have the look. You've got a rookery bow. Nobody in these valleys carries a rookery bow. You've come down through the burn, haven't you? Answer my question. Lady Varen keeps a hall a day's ride south. She was a cousin of the king's mother. She is not a cousin of the king, which is the important part of the sentence. Her riders watch this stretch of the tree line. We don't bother farmers. We don't bother travelers unless they give us reason. You're a traveler. I'm not bothering you. Put the arrow down. What are you looking at in the hollow? A body. Whose? I don't know yet. That's why I was looking. She held the bow steady. She took 2 steps sideways so that she could see down into the hollow without losing her line on him, and there was a body in the hollow. It was a man, face down, in the kind of coat a king's courier wore, with a leather case strapped across his back, and the case had been opened, and the papers that had been in it were scattered around the body in a wide, pale ring in the brown leaves. What are the papers? I haven't read them yet. Read one, slow, no sudden motion. You're serious. Read one. He went down into the hollow. He went slow. He kept one hand out, palm up, the whole way. He picked up the nearest paper. He turned it so that the writing was toward her. He squinted at it. It's a list. A list of what? Names. Read them. I don't recognize most of them. Read the ones you do. He read. He read 3. At the 3rd one, his voice changed, and he stopped reading, and he looked up at her over the top of the paper, and she saw his face do a thing that she had seen on other men's faces only twice in her life. The face a man makes when he has understood something about the woman in front of him that he did not understand 60 seconds ago. The 3rd name. Yes. Elara Voss. Yes. It's a list of names the king has been looking for. It's marked, in red, at the top. To be located and returned to the court, alive before the turn of the year. Your name's the 3rd one down. Her mouth went dry. Why? I don't know. Give me the paper. Lady Varen will want to see... Give me the paper, Kellen. He came up out of the hollow. He held the paper out. She did not lower the bow. She took the paper with her offhand and she stepped back, and she glanced at it, and it was exactly what he had said it was. It was a list of 17 names written in a careful court hand, and her name was 3rd from the top, with a small notation beside it in the same red ink as the heading Priority, of personal interest to His Majesty. Of personal interest. I noticed that too. Who wrote this? I don't know. A court clerk. It'd be signed at the bottom. She turned the paper over. At the bottom, there was a seal, pressed in wax, and beside the seal there was a name written out in block capitals. And she read the name, and she read it again. And then she looked up at Kellen over the top of the page, and her voice was not steady anymore. This seal. Yes. It's the king's personal seal, not the court seal, the personal one. The one he presses with his own hand. Yes. He wrote this himself. It looks that way. Why would the Alpha King of the 5 Rivers write out a list of exiles in his own hand and send it out with a courier in the lower valleys where couriers are being killed in the tree line? Kellen was quiet. Kellen? I don't know. Guess. I don't want to guess, traveler. Guess anyway. He looked at the ground. He looked at the body in the hollow. He looked at her. I'd guess, he said slowly, that the king does not trust his own court with this list. I'd guess he wrote it himself because he thinks someone in his own hall is working against him. I'd guess he sent it to someone out here he thinks he can still trust. And I'd guess that someone is the person the courier was going to when he took the arrow. And I'd guess... He stopped. Go on. I'd guess that you, traveler, are the reason the list exists. Personal interest isn't a phrase a king uses lightly. The king wants you back. Whatever he did to you 3 years ago, and I can see on you that he did something, it's in the way you're holding that bow. He has changed his mind about it, and he has changed his mind in a way he can't say out loud to his own court. And he is looking for you the only way he can look, which is quietly, through his own handwriting. Through men like the one in that hollow, and somebody in his hall, or somebody close to his hall, does not want him to find you. Whoever took the courier down. That's who you should be afraid of, traveler. Not the king, She stood in the tree line with the paper in her hand. The cold in her chest moved. It moved down her arm, and it moved into the paper. And for one short second she felt the wax of the seal warm under her fingers, the way a stone warms when you hold it long enough. And then she pulled her hand back, and the paper was only paper again, and the wax was only wax. Kellen. Yes. Who do you ride for? Really? I told you, Lady Varen. And who does Lady Varen ride for? He hesitated. Kellen, who does Lady Varen ride for? Nobody anymore. That's the whole point. 6 months ago she rode for the king's brother. Then the king's brother was put out of the court, and Lady Varen was given a choice. And she did not choose the king. And she did not choose the brother because the brother had already lost. She chose to hold her own hall and her own riders and wait. She is not the only one, traveler. There are 4 other halls in the Low Country that have done the same. We are not an army. We are not a rebellion. We are what is left. When a kingdom begins to come apart and people decide they are going to hold their own ground and see who ends up standing. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes. Then understand this too. If the king wrote this list himself, then the king still believes he has a chance. That is very dangerous for you. And if somebody in his hall took this courier down before the list could reach the person it was meant for, then that somebody is very dangerous for everybody, and that somebody is going to be the one who finds you, not the king, because that somebody has already started looking, and the king has not. She folded the paper. She put it in the inside pocket of her coat. She kept the bow up. What do you want, Kellen? Right now. Right now. Right now, I want you to not put an arrow in my throat. After that, I want to ride back to Lady Varen's hall and tell her what happened in this hollow. I was not going to tell her about you. I had not made up my mind about you. I have made up my mind now. I'm going to tell her. What are you going to tell her? I'm going to tell her, he said carefully, that I found the courier and I found the list. And the list has a name on it that she needs to know about. And the name is walking the tree line a day's march north of her hall with a rookery bough. And if the name is what the name seems to be, then Lady Varen needs to decide, before any other hall in the Low Country decides, whether she is going to stand between you and the ones who are looking for you, or whether she is going to be the first one to hand you over for the gold they are offering. Gold. Did I not mention the gold? No. There is gold, traveler. There is a lot of gold on your head. The king's list has a number on it, and the number is... He paused. The number is more than the sum of my life and my father's life and my father's father's life. They are not offering that number for a healer from a fen. She lowered the bow. She did not lower it all the way. She lowered it to her thigh, and she kept the arrow nocked, and she looked at him across 15 feet of black leaves. Kellen? Yes. If I go with you to Lady Varen, and Lady Varen decides the wrong way, what happens? I don't know. Guess. You die in her hall, traveler. Quickly, if she is kind. Slowly, if she is what her mother was. And if I don't go with you, then you walk south. And every day you walk south, the chance gets higher that the next rider you meet is not me, and the next rider after that is not me either. And one of them will be faster than you with a bow, and you will die in a ditch like the courier in that hollow, and the list in your pocket will end up in the hands of somebody neither of us wants it to end up with. She looked at him. She looked at the hollow. She looked at the gray country around them. The wrong-colored country. The country that had been waiting for her for 3 years. The cold in her chest was loud now. It was the loudest it had ever been. It pushed at the inside of her ribs and it pushed at the underside of her tongue. And it pushed, she realized, at the paper folded in her pocket. At the seal. At the name in red ink. At the small, careful hand of the man who had called her weak in front of his court, and who was now, for reasons she did not understand, writing her name out by himself in the dead of night and sending it into the valleys under his own seal. Kellen. Yes, traveler. Take me to Lady Varen. You sure? No, take me anyway. He got on his horse. He did not turn his back on her while he did it. He offered her his hand and she did not take it, and she walked beside the horse instead, and they went south through the tree line, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Half a mile on, where the track crossed a frozen stream, he finally said, without looking down at her, Traveler. Yes. Is the name on the list your name? She did not answer for a long time. She watched the horse's breath go up in the cold. She watched her own breath go up. She watched, past the stream, the long, slow slope of the valley going down toward Lady Varen's hall, which she could not see yet, but which was there, waiting, a day's walk south. Yes, she said, it's my name. They kept walking. Neither of them saw the second rider on the far ridge behind them, who had been watching the hollow through a glass for the last 20 minutes, and who lowered the glass now and turned his horse and rode hard to the southwest, toward a different hall entirely, with a different name on his tongue. Lady Varen's hall sat at the bottom of a narrow valley, between two ridges that folded in on it, the way two hands fold around a flame to keep it from going out. It was not a castle. It was not trying to be. It was a long, low house of cut stone with a stockade around it, and a second stockade outside that one, and a third, and between the second and the third was a strip of flat ground wide enough to ride a horse on. And Elara understood as she came through the outermost gate that the strip of flat ground was not a road, but a killing ground, and that the woman who had built this hall had built it, knowing a day was coming when she was going to have to kill men in it. They reached the inner gate at dusk. Kellen had not spoken for the last 3 miles. The guard at the gate was a woman, which surprised Elara, and the woman looked at Kellen and at Elara and at the bow across Elara's back, and the woman said to Kellen, without moving, "Who's this?" "Need to see her ladyship." Not an answer. "Gwen, open the gate." Not an answer, Kellen. "It's the one on the list." The guard's face did not change. That was the thing about Lady Varen's hall that Elara began to understand in the first 10 minutes she was inside it, that nobody in this place let their face change. It was a discipline. You came up through this gate and you learned not to let your face tell anybody anything, because everybody was watching you and everybody was measuring what you gave away. And the people who gave away the most did not live long in Lady Varen's service. "Open the gate," Kellen said again. The guard opened the gate. They walked the horse across the killing ground. Elara did not look around her. She kept her eyes on the back of Kellen's coat, because if she looked around her, she was going to see how many archers were in the slits of the second stockade, and she did not want to know. The inner door of the hall was heavy oak bound with iron, and there were 2 men standing in front of it, and both of the men watched her come without speaking, and one of them stepped aside to open the door. And the other one said, very quiet, to Kellen, "Her ladyship is at supper." "It won't wait." "She said she was not to be disturbed at supper tonight, Kellen." "It won't wait, Havel." Havel looked at Elara. Havel was a big man with a broken nose and a neck you could have tied a cow to, and he looked at her the way a stockman looks at livestock he is being asked to value, and then he opened the door. "Your funeral." The hall was warm. That was the first thing. After 11 days in the burn and another 15 in the low country, warmth was a thing Elara felt in her whole body, and the warmth was so thick she nearly swayed on her feet in the doorway. The second thing she noticed was the smell: roast meat, onions, wood smoke, and under all of it, faint but there, the bittersweet smell of bread made from grain that was not quite right. They had been eating the gray mill flour in this hall. Not much of it, not fresh, but some. She made a note of it without meaning to. Lady Varen sat at the far end of a long table, alone. She was not old. Elara had assumed, from the way Kellen had spoken of her, that she would be old, a gray-haired matriarch with rings on every finger, and she was wrong. Lady Varen was maybe 40. She had dark hair cut short at her jaw, which Elara had never seen on a noble woman, and she wore a man's coat, and she was eating with a knife and a hunk of bread and nothing else. And when the door opened, she did not look up. "Kellen." "Lady." "I said not tonight." "I know, lady. And yet, I brought someone you need to see." Lady Varen chewed. She chewed slowly. She finished what was in her mouth. She set the knife down on the edge of the plate with a small, clean sound, and she lifted her eyes, and she looked for the first time at Elara standing in the doorway with the rookery bow across her back and the courier's paper in her pocket. Lady Varen's face did not change either, but her eyes moved slow from Elara's boots up to Elara's face, and on the way up they stopped at the satchel, and stopped again at the shape of the folded paper under the coat, and stopped a third time at something in Elara's own face that Elara did not know was there. And at the end of the look, Lady Varen picked up the knife again and cut a slice of bread off the hunk and held it out across the table. "Sit down, girl. You look like you haven't eaten in a week." "I've eaten." "Sit down anyway. Kellen, out." "Lady, out, Kellen. Close the door. Stand on the other side of it. If I call, come in. If I don't call, don't." Kellen went. The door closed. It was the heaviest door Elara had ever heard close, and the sound of it closing sat in the hall for a second and then went away, and she was alone with the woman at the end of the table. "Sit." She sat. She sat 3 chairs down from Lady Varen, not directly across from her. She put the satchel on the floor between her boots. She took the slice of bread because it would have been stupid not to, and she bit it, and the bread was good bread, not gray mill bread, and she chewed it, and her hands were shaking a little. "You have a paper," Lady Varen said. "Yes." "Give it to me." "No." Lady Varen looked up. Her eyebrows lifted, very slightly. It was the first change her face had made. "No." "You read it in front of me, lady, at this table. I don't hand papers to people who could have me killed before the bread's done." Lady Varen smiled. It was a small smile, and it was not a kind smile, but it was the first real expression Elara had seen on the face across from her, and she thought, with some small part of her that was still thinking, "This one, at least, is honest." "Fair enough. Put it on the table. Don't give it to me. Slide it." Elara took the paper out of her coat. She unfolded it. She laid it flat on the wood. She slid it with 2 fingers halfway down the length of the table. Lady Varen reached for it and read it and did not pick it up. She read it twice. When she was done, her eyes came back to Elara, and this time they stayed. "Voss?" "Yes." "Of Hollowbrook?" "Yes." "Put out under the old rite at Vareth 3 winters ago?" "Yes." "Reason for exile, as stated in the court record. Weakness. Unworthy blood. Embarrassment to the traditions of the hall. And reason for exile, as you yourself understand it." Elara put the crust of the bread down. She wiped her hand on her coat. She met the eyes across the table, and she gave the answer she had not given out loud to anyone in 3 years. Not to Mara, not to Senna, not to Kellen. "Because the king's brother added my name to the list to embarrass the king. And the king took the embarrassment out on me instead of the brother, and the brother liked it that way. And the brother walked out of that hall with everything he wanted, which was a king who had made himself look small in front of his own court." Lady Varen was quiet. "You understand a great deal, for an herb woman." "I have had 3 years to understand it." "Yes, I imagine you have. The king is looking for you now. Did Kellen tell you?" "Kellen told me." "Did he tell you why?" "He guessed. I did not argue with the guess." "What did he guess?" "That the king changed his mind. That the king has seen something in the state of his kingdom that has made him reconsider the old rite. That the king does not trust his own hall, which is why he wrote the list in his own hand. And that somebody in the king's hall, or close to it, is trying to find me before he does. And you think the third of those is the one that should worry you." "Yes, you're right." Lady Varen pushed the paper back toward her, not all the way, but halfway. She leaned back in her chair. She picked up a cup of wine that had been sitting beside her plate, and she drank from it, and she set it down, and she said, as easily as if she were discussing the weather, "The man who wants you dead is Lord Doran Kyle." Elara did not move. "The king's brother?" "Yes." "He was put out of the court." "He was put out of the court in a manner of speaking. The court told itself that he was. The court was wrong. Lord Doran has been running the king's hall from behind a curtain for 10 years, girl, long before he put your name on the selection list. Your exile was not the first time he used a woman to make the king look small. It was the first time the king fell for it so completely. I think, to this day, Ronan does not know it was done to him. I think he believes he rejected you because you were rejectable. I think Doran has let him believe that for 3 years while the kingdom went to pieces. And now Ronan has begun to wonder, late, the way careful men wonder late, whether he was played. And Doran has noticed the wondering. And Doran has decided that the cleanest solution is that you be found and killed and buried where Ronan will never find you, so that Ronan will never ask the question his wondering is building toward. Which question? Whether the woman he threw out of his hall 3 years ago was the one the land needed. Elara looked down at the table. She looked at the grain of the wood. She put her hand flat on the wood, and the cold in her chest went down her arm, down her palm, into the table. And the table was old oak, dead for 40 years, and she felt under her hand the long, slow rings of it, the years of it, the way the tree had grown in a valley not far from this one, and had been cut in a winter, and had been dried for a summer, and had been planed into boards, and had been put together with wooden pegs by a carpenter named, she did not know, the table did not know, but the table remembered the shape of his hands. And she pulled her hand back because she did not want Lady Varin to see her doing it, and Lady Varin had already seen. "So it's true," Lady Varin said. "What's true?" "What the priestess from the North River has been saying in every kitchen between here and Grey Mill. You're the one." "I don't know what the priestess has been saying." "She's been saying the land has a woman in it who can mend it, and that the woman is walking south. She's been saying this since midsummer. I did not believe her. I should have believed her. People in my position who do not believe priestesses from the North River tend to end up very surprised, very late. What did you just do to my table?" "I felt it. Felt it. The wood, I felt into it." "And what did you feel?" "That it remembered the man who made it. That it was cut in the winter of a year I don't know. That the valley it grew in was south of here and a little east, because the grain goes that way." Lady Varin set the wine cup down. She looked for the first time as if she did not entirely know what she was looking at. "Can you mend things, Voss?" "I don't know. You don't know. I mended a crack in a log. I brought a leaf off a dead sapling. I saved a child from ergot poison 2 weeks ago, and I have saved other people from other things over the last 3 years, but I do not know yet whether what I can do is big enough for what this valley needs. I am not—" She paused, and she said the next part carefully because she had not said it out loud before. "I am not a miracle lady. I am a woman with a touch for green things and a book I should probably not have read. Do not put on me more than I am." "How much do I have to put on you, Voss?" "I don't know. Show me what needs mending. I'll tell you what I can do." Lady Varin stood up. "Come with me." Lady Varin walked her out of the hall through a side door Elara had not seen from the table. They went down a corridor that smelled of cold stone, and out another door into the yard behind the hall, and across the yard to a low shed with a heavy door and a single lamp burning beside it, and Havel was at the door, and Havel looked at Lady Varin and did not speak. "Open it." "Lady, she's, I know what she is, Havel. Open the door." He opened the door. The shed had 4 people in it. 3 of them were lying on pallets, and the 4th was a woman sitting on a stool beside the pallets with a damp rag in her hand, and the woman was crying without sound. The 3 people on the pallets were not moving. They were breathing, but the breathing was the long, thin, far-away breathing of people who were close to the edge. And the smell in the shed was the smell Elara had smelled at the farmhouse the month before. And it was worse. Her husband. Lady Varin's voice went low. Her son. Her brother. All 3. They got into a sack of the Grey Mill flour a week ago. I thought they were past it. 2 days ago, they went down again. I don't have a healer, Voss. My healer went to Corin in the summer and did not come back. I have been treating them with whatever I could find in the kitchen and with prayers I do not believe in, and they are going to be dead by morning, all 3 of them, unless someone in this hall who knows more than I do comes through that door. Is that person you, or is it not? Elara was already kneeling beside the first pallet. Hot water, as much as you can boil, garlic. I need hyssop if you have it, and if you don't, I need mint. I need the cleanest rag in this hall. I need someone to hold this man's head up so he doesn't drown when I put the water in him. I need— Havel, you heard her. Lady, go. Havel went. Elara worked. She worked on the son first because the son was the youngest and the closest to the edge. And she worked with her hands on his chest and the cold in her chest going down her arms and into the boy. And the poison in him was deep. It was 2 poisonings layered on top of each other, and she had to coax the older one out first because the older one was what was killing him. She did not know she was speaking out loud until Lady Varin, behind her, said, very quiet, What are you saying, Voss? I don't know. You're saying words. I know. What words? Old ones. She did not stop saying them. She did not know where they were coming from. They were coming up out of her the way water comes up out of a well when the well has not been drawn from. In a long time. And the words were not words she remembered reading in the book, although they must have been, or must have been some shape of the words that had been in the book, and they were steady and low, and they were the shape of the work she was doing with her hands. The boy's breathing changed. It changed under her palm first, a small hitch, and then it smoothed, and then it deepened, and the gray on his lips began very slowly to go away. And at Elara's side, the mother made a sound Elara had never heard a human being make, a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh and half a question, and which did not belong to any of those things. And the mother put her hand over her mouth with both of her other hands, as if her own sound had frightened her. Elara moved to the brother, then to the husband. The husband was the hardest because the husband had the slower sickness underneath, the same slow thing she had felt in the farmer at the farmhouse, and she understood for the first time that the slow thing was not a coincidence, that it was in a lot of people, that it was tied to the land the people had been living on. And she did not try to fix the slow thing tonight, but she put a hand on the husband's chest and she spoke to it. The way you speak to an animal, you are not going to fight, but are going to have to live with. And the slow thing went quiet under her hand, not gone, only quiet, and she left it that way. When she stood up, her legs did not hold her the first try. Lady Varin caught her under the elbow without making anything of it, and held her up, and did not let go until Elara had steadied. "How long?" Lady Varin said. "Before they're up?" "Yes." "The boy, a day. The brother, 2. The husband, a week. And he will not be the same because he has the other thing, and the other thing is going to come back. I can slow it. I cannot take it out of him tonight. I will need—" She swallowed. "I will need to take it out of him, and out of the others in your hall who have it, later, not tonight." "How many in my hall have it?" "I don't know, lady. A quarter of them, maybe. It's in the grain. The grain has been sick for longer than the ergot, and the sickness in the grain has been going into the people who eat it for years, not weeks. And I have felt it in every field I have walked past between here and the burn. It is not a poison the way ergot is a poison. It is a—" She searched for the word. "It is a tiredness. It is the land being tired. When the land is tired, the things that grow in it are tired. When the things that grow in it are tired, the people who eat those things are tired. And after enough years of eating tired things, the people do not get better when they should get better, and they die of things they should not die of. And the kingdom looks around itself and says, 'Our people are weaker than they were, and the kingdom is right, but the kingdom does not know why.'" Anochikit. Lady Varin had gone very still. "You're saying the kingdom is sick. I am saying the land is tired, and the kingdom is what lives on it. And when the land is tired for long enough, the kingdom is sick, yes. And I am saying that it has been tired for, I don't know, 10 years, 20, longer than my exile, longer than the old king. It did not start with Ronan, but it has gotten worse in the last 3 years, and it has gotten worse fast. And I do not think it is an accident that it has gotten worse since I was put out of the hall, because—" She stopped. She did not finish the sentence. She did not yet know how to finish it. "Because the land knew you," Lady Varin said softly, finishing it for her. "And when the land knew you had been thrown away, the land decided it had been thrown away too. I don't know if that is true, lady. I don't know if land decides things." "I don't know either, Voss. But there are 3 men breathing in this shed who were not breathing an hour ago, and I am going to have to start believing in something, and I might as well start with the thing standing in front of me." She turned. She went to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "Voss?" "Yes." "If I put my hall behind you—" "You haven't yet." "I am about to. If I put my hall behind you, what do you need?" "I need to be left alone for the night. I need to eat. I need to sleep somewhere with a door that locks. And in the morning, I need to see your grain stores and your well and every field within a day's ride. Because if you are going to put your hall behind me, then your hall needs to eat through the winter. And right now your hall cannot. Havel will show you to a room. Havel's wife will bring you food. There is a key to the room, and the key will be yours for as long as you are in this hall. In the morning I will take you to the stores myself." "Lady?" "Yes, Voss." "I have not said yes to anything yet." "I know." "I am not your healer." "I know. If I stay in your hall, it is because I am choosing to stay, not because you are choosing for me." Lady Varin looked at her. She looked at her the way a woman looks at another woman she has been waiting a long time to meet, and she said, You will find, Elara Voss, that I do not choose for people. That is why people come to my hall. Sleep well." She went out. Elara did not sleep well. She did not sleep at all at first. She lay on the pallet in the room Havel showed her to, with the key on the small table beside her, and she listened to the hall settle around her, the small sounds of a house that had 100 people in it getting ready for the night. And she thought about the boy in the shed and the shape of his breathing when it had changed under her hand, and she thought about the slow tiredness in the husband. And she thought about what Lady Varen had said about the priestess from the North River, and most of all she thought about the name at the top of the list in her coat pocket, written in the king's own hand. She got up somewhere after midnight. She lit the candle beside the bed. She opened the book. She had read the book 100 times. She had read every page of it. But she turned now to a page near the back, a page she had always skipped over because the writing on it was not the writing of the rest of the book. And the page had 3 words on it, and the 3 words were a heading, and under the heading there were no instructions, only a list of properties, a list of things the thing at the top of the page could do, written out in the same careful, old-handed way the rest of the book was written. And she read the list slowly, and when she was done, she closed the book and she put her forehead down against the cover of it, and she sat like that for a long time, and the candle burned down half an inch. The 3 words were mending of soil. She had always thought the page was a joke. She had always thought it was a page somebody had added to the book as a wish or a prayer or a note about a thing a practitioner might one day do if she was stronger than any practitioner in the line had ever been. She had read the list of properties as a description of a myth. She understood now, in Lady Varen's hall, with the boy's breath still on her palm, that it had not been a joke, and not a wish, and not a prayer. It had been a list. Somebody in her line had done it once. Somebody in her line had known the procedure. The procedure was not on the page because the procedure had never been written down, because procedures of that kind never were. The procedure was the kind of thing you worked out for yourself when the land asked you to. And you worked it out, or you did not. And if you did not, the land did not ask you twice. The land was asking her. She blew the candle out. She lay back on the pallet. She slept, finally, for 3 hours before dawn. In the morning, Lady Varen took her to the grain stores. The stores were bad. Elara did not need her hands to tell her that. She could see it. The granary was a long, low stone building behind the hall, and the sacks inside it were stacked in rows, and the rows were short, and the grain in the sacks was not the grain it should have been. She put her hand on the top sack of the nearest row, and she felt into the grain, and the grain was tired, the way the husband had been tired. And it was more than tired, it was wrong, and she closed her eyes. And she reached down with the cold in her chest, and she felt down through the grain, and down through the floor, and down through the stone, and down into the dirt under the stone. And the dirt under the stone was the dirt of the valley. And the dirt of the valley was, she opened her eyes. Lady. Yes, this is not going to be easy. I did not think it was going to be easy, Voss. Let me say that again. I can mend your stores. I can do it tonight, if I spend what I have on it. But your stores are a sip of what your hall will eat this winter. And when the stores are gone, the hall eats off the fields. And the fields are the tired thing, lady. The grain came out of the fields tired. If I mend your stores, I buy your hall 2 weeks. If I mend your fields, I buy your hall the rest of the winter and all of the next one. Mending your fields will take me, she paused. It will take me weeks. I do not know how many, and I will not be able to do anything else while I am doing it. I will be thin. I will not be a weapon for you. I will not be a healer for you. I will be a woman with her hands in your dirt and nothing else. How thin? I do not know. Can it kill you? I do not know that either. Lady Varen was quiet for a long time. They stood in the granary with the cold coming through the door and the grain dust moving in the slant of light from the narrow window. If I say no, Lady Varen said, then I feed your hall for a week. And I walk south, because there are other halls, and there is a king, and there is a brother who wants me dead, and I did not come down off the mountain to be a pet healer in a hall that chose not to bet on me. Lady Varen laughed. It was a sharp, short laugh. Voss, lady, you are not what I expected. I am not what I expected either, lady. Mend my stores tonight. Mend my fields starting tomorrow. I will put my hall around you while you do it. If you go thin, I will put my hall between you and anybody who wants to come close to you. If it kills you, I will bury you in the orchard behind this hall, and I will burn Doran Kale's house down the week after. Do we have an understanding?" "We have an understanding, lady." "Good. Come inside. You need to eat before you do anything." She mended the stores that night. She did it alone, in the granary, with the door locked, and Havel outside it, and a single lamp burning. She did not use the book. She did not need to. The procedure in the book was for soil, not grain, and she was working the other way round. She put her hands into the top of each sack, row by row, and she felt down into the grain, and she called the tiredness up out of it into herself, the way a woman draws poison out of a wound with her mouth, and she held the tiredness in her chest until it went cold, and cold, and colder. And when it was too cold to hold, she turned her face to the stone wall, and she pressed her palm flat against it, and she pushed the tiredness out of herself and into the stone, and the stone did not care. The stone was a stone, and the stone could hold tiredness the way a grave holds anything. It took her 6 hours. By the end, she could not stand up, and she knelt in the straw in the middle of the granary with her forehead on the floor, and her nose was bleeding, and her hands were shaking so hard she could not hold them still. And she was not sure she could get to the door, and she did not need to, because the door opened on its own, and Havel came in. And Havel picked her up off the floor like a child and carried her out and up the stairs to the room with the key. And Havel's wife was waiting in the room with hot broth and a second pallet Havel laid her down on. And Havel's wife did not speak. She only fed her the broth, 1 spoon at a time, until Elara slept. She began on the fields 3 days later, after she had slept and eaten and slept again. It was slow work. It was the slowest work she had ever done. The first field took her 2 full days. She walked it in a line, and at every 10 paces she knelt, and she put both her hands down into the cold dirt, and she felt what was wrong, and she fixed what she could, and she walked on. Some of the tired places she could fix alone. Some of them needed the whole depth of her, and for those she went very thin. And Havel and 2 of his men walked at the edge of the field in a wide circle so that nobody from Lady Varen's hall came close enough to see what the work looked like from the inside, because the work did not look like anything from the outside, and it looked terrifying from the inside. And Havel had been in the shed the first night, and Havel had decided he was her man now, and Havel was careful about who saw what. On the 7th day she finished the first 3 fields. Lady Varen rode out to meet her at the edge of the 3rd field at dusk. Elara was sitting on a stone with her arms around her knees, and her face in the last of the sun, and she could feel the warm orange of it on her eyelids, and she did not look up when she heard the hoofbeats, because she knew the weight and the rhythm, and she knew it was Lady Varen. "Voss." "Lady?" "Stand up. Look." She stood up. The 3 fields behind her were not the color they had been 7 days ago. They were green, not the hard, bright green of midsummer, because it was autumn and the light was wrong for that green, but a softer green, a green that had not been in any of the fields of the Low Country for a long time. It was the green of grass that was not tired. It was the green of a thing that had remembered what green was. Lady Varen stared at the fields. She stared at them for a long time. She did not say anything for long enough that Elara began to wonder if Lady Varen was going to speak at all. And then Lady Varen got down off her horse, and she walked past Elara without looking at her, and she walked out into the middle of the first of the 3 fields, and she stood there in the grass with her hand down at her side and the tops of the new grass touching the back of her fingers. "Voss?" "Lady, how far does this reach?" "To the ditch at the east side, and the old cart track at the north. I haven't gone past either." "It's cold. The grass shouldn't be this long at this season. Not in a field that was gray 7 days ago." "No, lady." "What have you done, Voss?" "What you asked me to do, lady." Lady Varen stood in the field for another long moment. Then she turned. She walked back to where Elara was standing. She took off her glove. She held out her bare hand. Elara looked at it. "What?" "Take it, Voss." Elara took Lady Varen's hand. Lady Varen's hand was cold and strong, and older than her face had made Elara think it was. And Lady Varen did not shake her hand up and down. She simply held it and looked her in the eye and said, "When my grandmother was a girl, there was a woman in these valleys who could do what you are doing. My grandmother saw her once. My grandmother told me that a woman who could do that was worth any 6 kings they might put on the throne at Verith. And if such a woman ever came through our hall, we were to give her whatever she asked for and not ask questions. And if she did not ask for anything, we were to give her that too. I did not believe my grandmother. I thought she was an old woman with old women's stories. I owe you an apology, Voss, and I do not give apologies often. And this is the only one you will get from me, but it is a real one. I'm sorry I doubted you last week in my hall. Lady, I am not finished. The priestess from the North River is in my hall as of this afternoon. She came down the valley this morning. She came to see you. She says there are riders coming. 3 banners, she says. Mine is not one of them. Doran Kael's is one of them. The other 2 she would not name. They will be here in 4 days, Voss, maybe 5. They are coming fast. Elara looked down at the green field. She looked down at her own hand in Lady Varen's. 4 days. Maybe 5. Can your hall hold 4 days? My hall can hold a week against anything Doran can bring. Against the other 2 I do not know. It depends who they are. And the king? No sign of the king. Not yet. The king is still in Verith, as far as my scouts can tell. The king does not yet know you are here. Good. Good, Voss. I'm not ready for him yet. No, Voss. But you are closer than you were a week ago. They stood like that, in the edge of the field that had been gray 7 days before, with the cold coming down off the ridge, and the new grass moving against their ankles, and on the ridge above them, where the priestess from the North River had come down that morning, a small line of people had gathered without Elara noticing. They were not Lady Varen's household. They were villagers from the 3 small holds along the east road, farmers and weavers and a blacksmith and 2 children, and they had come because word had gotten up the valley, the way word did, and they had wanted to see, and they were seeing, and they were not speaking, and as Elara turned her head and looked up at the ridge, the last of the sunset caught them from behind, and they became, for a moment, only a row of black shapes against an orange sky, watching. One of them, the blacksmith, a big man, went down to one knee. He did not say anything. He only went down. His hand went to his chest, the way a man's hand goes to his chest, when he is acknowledging a thing he has seen and does not have the words for. And the people on either side of him, one by one, not all at once, went down with him. And the 2 children were the last. And the children went down because the adults had. And the whole ridge was kneeling, and Elara stood in the field and looked up at them and did not know what her face was doing, because the cold in her chest was doing something it had not done before, which was warm, a little, at the edges, for the first time in 3 years. Lady Varen let go of her hand. Voss, lady, that is the first of it. I know. The rest is going to be harder. I know, lady. Come inside, eat, sleep. We have 4 days. They walked back to the horses. Behind them the ridge stayed kneeling, and the green field moved in the cold wind, and the sky went from orange to red, and from red to the deep slow blue of an autumn night in a country that was, for the first time in a long time, remembering how to hold its own weight. They had 4 days, and they used 3 of them. The priestess from the North River was not what Elara had pictured. She had pictured an old woman with white hair and a staff. The priestess was maybe 30, with a scar down one side of her jaw and boots that had seen every road between here and the North River twice. And her name, when she finally gave it at the supper table on Elara's second day back in the hall, was Aelin. She did not sit at the head of the table, and she did not carry a staff, and she was not treated, by Lady Varen or by anyone else in the hall, as a priestess, which Elara realized, after watching her for an evening, was the point. Aelin did not want to be a priestess in that hall. Aelin wanted to be a woman at a table, and she wanted to eat her bread, and she wanted to look at Elara over the rim of her cup without being looked back at. "You're smaller than I thought," Aelin said on the second night, when most of the hall had emptied and the 2 of them were left at the long table with the last of the fire going down in the grate. "People keep saying that. I meant it as a compliment. Nobody means it as a compliment. I do. The big ones always fail. The big ones think the work is about them. The small ones know the work is about the work." Aelin set the cup down. "How much of the book have you read?" "All of it." "The page at the back?" "Yes." "And?" "It doesn't tell you how to do it." "No, that's why it's at the back." "Who put it there?" "A woman named Wren. She was your mother's grandmother's sister. She didn't like your mother's grandmother. She put the page in the book because she thought the line was going to need it one day, and she knew your mother's grandmother wouldn't teach it because your mother's grandmother was the careful kind. Your father was the careful kind too. You come from a careful line, Voss. That's why you lived. That's also why your line is going to end with you, unless you stop being careful in the next week. I've stopped being careful. No, you haven't. You're mending fields one at a time with Havel and two men walking a circle around you so nobody sees. That is the carefulest a person can be. What would the not careful version look like? Aelin smiled. It was the first real smile Elara had seen on her. You're about to find out. Doran gets here the day after tomorrow. He isn't alone. The two banners I wouldn't name in front of Lady Varen, one is Karsh of the Ember Gate. One is Yelena of the High Wold. Karsh is a butcher with a title. Yelena is worse. Yelena will kill a hall of women and call it a mercy because they won't have to see the winter. You can't fight them at the gate, Voss. Lady Varen can hold the gate against any two of them, but not all three, and not for long. You have to fight them somewhere else. Where? In front of the hall. In the open. Where everybody who comes with them can see what you are. If they see it at the gate, through arrow slits, they'll be told later it was a trick, and they'll believe it. If they see it in the open field, with nothing between you and them, they will know what they saw, and they will tell it to everybody they meet for the rest of their lives, and that is worth more to you than the gate. I might die in the open field, Aelin. You might. You'll almost certainly die behind the gate. Pick the one you want the stories to be about. Elara did not answer. She looked down into her own cup. The fire had burned down far enough that the shadows in the hall had gotten long, and in the long shadows at the other end of the table, Lady Varen was sitting quietly, with Havel beside her, and the two of them had been listening without interrupting, and Lady Varen spoke now for the first time in 20 minutes. She's right, Voss. I know she's right, lady. Then we planned for the open field. They planned for the open field. They planned all through the next day and into the next night, with maps spread on the long table and Havel marking the roads in charcoal, and Aelin making small corrections where the maps were wrong. And in the middle of the second day's planning, a rider came up out of the south with his horse foaming, and he was one of Lady Varen's outriders, and he had come from the south road. And his news was two things, and the first was that Doran Cale had split his force, and the second was that the king had left Vareth. When? Lady Varen said. 3 days ago, lady. With how many? 40. It's a small column. He's moving fast. Heading. South and east. He's going to reach us ahead of Doran, lady, if he keeps the pace. Ahead. By a day. Maybe half a day. Lady Varen set the charcoal stub down on the map. She did not look at Elara. She looked at the map. She looked at the place on the map where her hall was, and at the place on the map where the king was, and at the place on the map where Doran was, and she said, without looking up, Voss? Lady. He's coming for you himself. Yes. He's bringing 40 men. Doran is bringing 5 times that. Yes. The king is going to reach my hall first. The king is going to reach my hall alone, essentially, because 40 men against Doran's column is nothing. The king is walking into this, and he does not know it. He thinks he is riding ahead of his brother to find you. He does not know his brother is riding to kill him as much as to kill you. I don't think he does, lady. So we have a choice, Voss. I know. We can close the gate on him and let his brother catch him in the open and watch him die on the road a mile from my house. Or we can open the gate and take him in. Elara looked at the map. She had thought about this moment for 3 years. She had thought about it in the back room at the rookery, and in the burn, and in the hollow, where Kellen had stood over the courier's body, and in her own head every night since the priestess's name had come up at supper. And she had imagined the moment a dozen different ways, and in none of them had Ronan Kyle been coming to her with 40 men instead of 400, and in none of them had he been coming alone, and in none of them had she held the choice about whether he lived. She had imagined walking into his hall. She had not imagined him walking into hers. Lady, Voss, open the gate. Lady Varen looked at her. Are you sure? No. Tell me why, anyway. Because if he dies on the road a mile from your house, his brother steps into his chair in 2 weeks, and the kingdom is worse than it has ever been, and everything I have spent 3 years becoming was for nothing. Because a king who has ridden out with 40 men to find the woman he threw away has already done a thing with his own hands that I did not think Ronan Cale could do. because I am not going to have him killed by a man I hate more than I hate him, and because—" She paused, and she said the last part because it was true, even though she did not want it to be. "Because I want him to see me. I want him to see what he threw away. I'm not big enough yet to pretend I don't want that. Maybe in 20 years I'll be big enough. Not today." "Voss?" "Yes, lady. You have more honesty in you than most of the men I have ever known." "Thank you, lady." It was not entirely a compliment. "Hovel, open the south gate tomorrow at noon. If the king's column comes up the road, we let it in. Put Kellen on the outer wall to watch for Doran. The moment Doran's column is in sight, the gate closes behind the king, and the king learns that his brother has been riding to kill him, and we learn whether the king can still be trusted. If he can, we fight Doran in the open with him beside us. If he can't—" She shrugged. "Havel will deal with him." "Yes, lady." Ronan Kael rode into Lady Varen's courtyard at noon the next day, and he rode in at the head of 38 men, because 2 of his men had taken a wound on the road, and he had left them at a farmhouse to be cared for. And he did not know yet that the farmhouse was one Elara had walked through 2 weeks before, and the family that took his wounded men in had taken them in because a woman had come through and mended the fever in their youngest daughter and had refused payment for it, and they could not refuse the king now. He did not see her at first. He dismounted in the courtyard. He handed his reins to a boy. He looked up at Lady Varen on the steps of the hall, and he said, in the voice Elara remembered, the voice that carried without effort, "Lady Varen, I come under a flag of truce to ask a question." "Ask it, Your Majesty." "I have reason to believe the woman Elara Voss has been in your hall. I am not here to take her. I am not here to charge you. I am here to—" He paused, and Elara, standing behind the door at the top of the steps with the door cracked an inch, saw him put his hand on the pommel of his sword, the way a man puts his hand on a thing to steady himself. "I am here to speak to her, if she is still alive, and if she will see me." Lady Varen did not answer him. Lady Varen turned her head toward the cracked door and looked at Elara through the gap, and waited. Elara pushed the door open. She walked out onto the top step. She did not wear a gown. She wore the coat Senna had given her 3 autumns ago, with the rookery boots and the satchel across her shoulder, and the bow had been left inside because there was no point in carrying the bow into a courtyard full of the king's men, and her hair was the hair of a woman who had not slept more than 5 hours a night in the last 2 weeks, and her hands, she noticed only after she had them at her sides, were the hands of a woman who had been putting them into cold dirt for a week. Ronan saw her. He did not speak. He did not move. For the length of a long, slow moment, he simply looked at her, and his face did the thing she had wanted for 3 years, his face to do, and did it less satisfyingly than she had imagined. He went pale. He went still. Something in the set of his shoulders came down half an inch and stayed down, and she watched him understand very slowly that she was alive and that she was here, and that the woman standing at the top of Lady Varen's steps was not the woman who had curtsied wrong at the foot of his dais 3 years ago, and that he had been very wrong, about a number of things, for a long time. "Miss Voss." "Your Majesty." "You—" He stopped. He tried again. "You lived." "Yes." He stopped again. "I had heard. I was not sure I believed it." "I don't know what you heard, Your Majesty." "I heard a woman had been mending fields in the Low Country. I heard a priestess was walking through kitchens saying the land had a woman in it who could save it. I heard that the woman had a name, and the name was yours. I did not believe it until 2 nights ago, when I realized I did, and by then I was already on the road." "Why are you on the road, Your Majesty?" He looked up at her. He looked at her the way 3 years ago he had looked at the broken bottle on the step. His eyes had the same winter river cold in them, but the cold had a new thing under it, a thing she had not seen in them in the hall, and she did not have a word for the thing yet, but she watched it move under the cold while he picked his next sentence. "Because my brother is behind me," he said, "and my brother is going to kill me, and I'm going to deserve it, and before he does it, I need to say something to you, Miss Voss, that I should have said 3 years ago." Elara did not move. "Say it in the field, Your Majesty." Your brother's column will be in sight by tonight. We do not have time for a conversation on steps. Come inside. Eat. Rest your men. We will have this conversation tomorrow, in the open, in front of everyone who came with you and everyone from this hall, and we will have it once, and it will be the last one we have. Lady Varen. Voss, will your hall house the king tonight? My hall will house the king tonight, Voss. Thank you, lady. She turned. She walked back through the door, and she did not look at Ronan Cale again until the next morning. Doran Cale's column came over the south ridge at dawn. Elara stood in the front field of Lady Varen's hall and watched them come. She stood with her boots in grass that had been gray 2 weeks ago and was green now, and Lady Varen stood on her right and Aelin on her left, and Havel a step behind her with a bow, and 30 of Lady Varen's riders in a loose line behind Havel, and Ronan Cale stood to the right of Lady Varen with his sword on, and his 38 men in a line behind him. And the whole of it together did not amount to 100 people, and the column coming over the ridge was 284. Doran halted his column 100 yards out. He rode forward alone, on a gray horse, with a herald beside him carrying his banner, and a second rider behind him carrying the banners of Karsh and Yelena. And he stopped 20 paces from Elara, and he did not look at his brother, and he did not look at Lady Varen, and he looked only at Elara. And he smiled. He had a face Elara had never seen in person before, although she had heard it described, and the descriptions had been too kind. He had his brother's bones, but softer, and the softness was not a softness. It was the kind of fat a man puts on when he has been sitting in warm rooms eating food. Other men harvested, and his eyes were intelligent and shallow, and he smiled at her the way a man smiles at an opponent he has already decided is not a real opponent, and he said, "Miss Voss, Lord Doran, you look well." "Thank you, my lord. I have come a long way to meet you. I hope you will forgive the size of my retinue. The roads are not safe, as I'm sure you've heard." "They have not been safe, my lord." "No. Well, I will come to the point, since my brother appears to have found his way here ahead of me, and I do not wish to keep him waiting. Miss Voss, the kingdom is in a state of some distress. The Alpha King, as you may have observed, has not been equal to the task of managing it. The court has begun in recent weeks to consider alternatives. I am one of those alternatives. I am, in fact, the most serious of them. I have come today to offer you a choice, Miss Voss, because I understand, as my brother apparently does not, that a woman of your particular gifts will be useful to whoever ends up sitting on the chair at Vareth, and I would rather have you beside me than against me. Do you understand?" "I understand, my lord. My offer is straightforward. Come with me to Vareth. Stand at my side when the court makes its decision. Mend what you can of the kingdom under my seal. In return, you will have a place at my court, a title of your own choosing, a house of your own founding, and the personal apology of the man currently standing to your right, in writing, delivered publicly at the hall where you were once, I believe, inconvenienced." "Inconvenienced. Poorly treated. I apologize for the word. And if I don't come with you, my lord, then I am afraid, Miss Voss, that the day is going to end in a way none of us would prefer. I have 284 men. You have—" He glanced over the line behind her, the way a man appraises livestock. 90 odd, most of whom will break when the arrows start. I do not want to kill Lady Varen, whose mother I was fond of. I do not want to kill my brother, though I will, because the time has come. I do not particularly want to kill you, Miss Voss, which is why I'm making this offer. But I will, if you make me. Now, come down off that field, walk to my horse, and we will ride back to Vareth together." Elara looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she knelt. She did not do it for him. She did it for the field. She put both her hands down into the grass, and she put her palms flat on the cold dirt under the grass, and she closed her eyes, and she reached down with the cold in her chest, down through the green she had put there, down through the old, tired dirt beneath the green, down into the stone under the dirt, and into the water that ran under the stone, and further, into the long, slow network of living threads that ran from this field to the next field, and to the field after that, and all the way back up the valley to the ridge where Doran's column sat, and out the other way down the valley to the villages she had walked through on her way here. And she felt for a long moment the whole of the low country, the way a woman feels the whole of her own body when she lies very still in the dark. The low country was tired, still, but it was awake now. It had been sleeping, and she had woken it, field by field, in the last 2 weeks, and now that it was awake, it knew her, and it was listening. She opened her eyes. Lord Doran. Miss Voss, I'm not going to Vareth with you. I thought you might say, I'm not finished. Lord Doran, I want you to look down. I beg your pardon. Look at the ground between your horse's hooves, my lord. He looked. The grass between his horse's hooves was not the grass that had been there 30 seconds ago. The grass had been the short, dry brown grass of Lady Varen's outer field, the grass that had not yet been mended because she had run out of days, and the grass now was long and green and thick, and it was growing visibly the way grass does not grow, and it was growing up around his horse's fetlocks, and at the same time, in a wide, slow ring around him, the same thing was happening, and his banner carrier's horse shifted uneasily, and the grass was at the first horse's knees, now, and still coming, and the other gray horses at the head of the column were beginning to move, because horses know a thing is wrong before men do, and Doran looked up at her, and the smile was gone. What is this, my lord? Listen to me. I have no quarrel with most of the men behind you. They are men who have been paid to ride to this field, and they will ride home tonight if they ride home at all, and I would prefer they ride home. You, however, are not going home. You are going back with your brother to Vareth, and you are going to sit in front of the court, and you are going to explain with your own voice what you did 3 years ago at the selection and why, and what you have done since then, and by whose order, and the court will decide what to do with you after. Do you understand me? Miss Voss, I am warning you. I am past warnings, my lord. Look to your right. He looked to his right. Karsh of the Ember Gate was on his right. A square-shouldered man with a black beard and a face that had, the day before, scared a town into opening its granary to him without protest. Karsh's hand was on the hilt of his sword, and Karsh was looking down because Karsh's horse had begun to scream. And around Karsh's horse's hooves, the grass had done the same thing it had done around Doran's horse. But the grass around Karsh was not just grass, it was something else. A low, dark creeper. Elara had pulled up out of the deep places under the field for this, because she knew the names now of every plant that grew in the low country, and some of them had names older than the kingdom, and the creeper was around Karsh's horse's legs, and it was tightening, and Karsh was hauling on the reins, and the horse was going over sideways. Yelena, look to your left. Yelena of the High Wold was on Doran's left. Yelena of the High Wold had killed more people than anyone else in the field that morning. Yelena's horse was already down. Yelena was on her feet, her sword out, and her boots were sinking into ground that had gone soft under her, and her eyes came up to Elara's, and Yelena of the High Wold, who had killed a haul of women the winter before, understood, in a way that was not a thought, but was a body knowing, that the field she was standing on had become, in the last 30 seconds, not hers. Drop the sword, Yelena. Yelena dropped the sword. Karsh, off your horse. Karsh got off his horse. Doran. Miss Voss, my lord, I want you to tell the column to lay down their weapons. Miss Voss, you cannot possibly... Tell them, my lord. The grass is a small thing. The grass is the smallest thing I can do. If you make me do a bigger thing, I will do a bigger thing, and your men will not ride home at all. Tell them. Doran looked at her. He looked for the first time at his brother, who had not moved. Ronan had not drawn his sword. Ronan had not spoken. Ronan had stood, the whole of this exchange, 3 paces to Elara's right, and his face had not changed, and his eyes were on his brother with an expression Elara could not read. And then, when Doran's eyes reached his, Ronan said very quietly, across the space between them, "Do what she tells you, brother. She is not bluffing." "You are afraid of a Fen woman, Ronan." "I am afraid of the thing she has woken. I was afraid of it 3 years ago, too. I did not know what I was afraid of then. I know now. Tell the column." Doran looked at the ground. He looked at his horse's legs, which were now buried in grass up to the hock. He looked at Karsh, standing in the dark creeper, not moving. He looked at Yelena, who had put her hands out away from her body, palm up, the way a person does when they have decided that today is not a good day to die. He turned in the saddle. He raised his hand. He called to the column, loudly, that weapons were to be set on the ground, and he held it there, his hand up, for a long moment, and the column did as it was told, because the column had seen enough from 100 yards. And then Doran put his hand back on the reins, and he looked at Elara one last time, and his face was not the face of the man who had ridden up to her 20 minutes ago. "Miss Voss?" "My lord." What happens now? You and your brother ride back to Verith together. Lady Varen sends 50 of her riders with you. I ride behind you with Aelin. When you reach Verith, you go into the hall in front of the court and you tell them what you have done. All of it. The selection, the list, the courier, the grain. After you have told them, the court will decide. I will not be in that decision. I have done my piece. The court will do its piece. Do you understand me? I understand you. Go. He went. They rode the 4 days back to Verith slowly because the country was watching, and Elara wanted the country to watch. At every village they passed through, people came out of the doors and stood along the road, and some of them went down on one knee, and some of them did not. And Elara did not speak to them from her horse, because she was not yet comfortable with being the thing they were watching, but she looked at them as she passed, and she tried to look at each face for at least a second, because the faces were not the faces that had laughed at her in the gallery of the hall 3 years ago, and she wanted to remember what a face looked like when it was not laughing. On the third night, at a camp by the side of the road, Ronan Kael came to her fire. He did not sit down. He stood on the other side of the fire, and he waited until she looked up at him, and then he said, Miss Voss, Your Majesty, I have been trying for 4 days to find the right words. I am not a man who is good at words. My father was not a man who was good at words. My mother was, and she died before she could teach me, and I have been running a kingdom on the words I could find in my own head, and the words in my own head have not been enough. 3 years ago I said in a hall, in front of my court, that you were weak. That was a lie. It was a convenient lie. It was a lie I told because my brother had put you in front of me, and I was angry with him and I wanted the court to see me cut something. You were what was in front of me. I did not see you at all that day. I saw a problem my brother had given me, and I solved it with your life. And I have thought about it, Miss Voss, not often, but sometimes in the years since, and I have never been proud of it. And 2 weeks ago I realized, very late, that the tiredness that was killing the kingdom had started the same year I had put you out of the hall, and I realized what I had done. And I rode as fast as I could to undo it, and you have already undone it, without my help, and I have nothing to offer you now except— He paused. He looked into the fire. Except an apology, which does not pay what I owe, and a throne, which I should not be the one to offer, because it is not mine to offer anymore, and you would not take it anyway, and the only other thing I have, which is the truth, which is that I was wrong, in front of you, in front of the court, in front of everything. I was wrong. Elara looked at him across the fire. She had thought, for 3 years, about what she was going to say in this moment. She had rehearsed 100 speeches in the back room at the rookery and in the cabins along the road and in her own head at Lady Varen's table, and she had, in most of those speeches, been cruel, because cruelty was the thing she had wanted, and she understood now, looking at him across the low fire, that cruelty was not the thing she had wanted. Cruelty had been a cover for the thing she had wanted, which was simpler and which she was going to have, because he had just given it to her, and because she was going to take it. Your Majesty, Miss Voss, I forgive you. He did not move, but not because you deserve it, and not because you apologized well, though you did, and I was not expecting you to. I forgive you because I am done carrying you. I have carried you for 3 years, Your Majesty. I carried you up a mountain, and I carried you through a burn, and I carried you into a hall that is not yours, and I am done. I am putting you down tonight. What you do tomorrow, in your hall, is your business. I will be there, because the court needs to see me there, and because your brother needs to know I am there. But after your brother has spoken, and after the court has decided, I am going to walk out of that hall, and I am not going back, and I am not going to be your queen, and I am not going to be anyone's queen, and I am going to go home to Hollowbrook, which is mine again under the reversal of the old right. And I am going to build a house, and I am going to plant a garden, and I am going to mend what of the land I can, slowly, the way a woman mends a thing, and I am not going to do it for you. Do you understand me, Your Majesty? Yes. Good. Miss Voss. Your Majesty, is there anything I can give you? No. Nothing. Nothing, Your Majesty. You gave me nothing 3 years ago, in the hall. You set me down at the edge of a road with a sack of bread and a wheel of cheese and a flint, and you told a man at a lantern to make sure I took the West Fork, and you thought nothing was what you were giving me. You were wrong about that too. Nothing turned out to be the most generous thing you could have given me, because nothing was what I needed to become what I became. I am going to give you the same thing tonight. I'm going to give you nothing. Take it well. It is worth more than it looks." He looked at her for a long moment across the fire. Then he nodded. He turned. He walked back to his own fire at the other end of the camp, and he did not look at her again that night, and she did not look at him. And in the morning they rode on. The hall at Verith, on the day Doran Cale stood in front of his court and said out loud what he had done, was very quiet. Elara stood at the back of it, near the door. She had asked Lady Varin to stand beside her, and Lady Varin had, and Aelin on her other side, and Kellen behind them, and Havel behind Kellen. They had not dressed her up for the hall. She had refused. She wore the coat and the rookery boots and the satchel and nothing else, and she stood with her back near the same pillar she had not quite reached 3 years ago on her way out of the hall under guard, and she listened to Doran speak, and she watched the court listen, and she watched the gallery, and she picked out, in the gallery, 2 of the faces she had memorized on her walk out 3 years ago, and she let herself, for 1 second, look at each of them, and then she let the looking go because it was not important anymore. Doran spoke for 1 hour and 20 minutes. He was a careful speaker. Even in confession, he was a careful speaker. He told them about the selection list, and about his reasons for adding her name, and about the years he had spent running the hall from behind his brother's chair, and about the courier he had killed, and about the 2 banners he had hired, and about a dozen other things the court had not known. And at the end of his speech, the court was quiet, and the steward asked formally whether anyone present wished to speak against the account. No one did. The court withdrew. The court was out for 2 hours. When the court came back, the steward read the decision. Lord Doran Cale was stripped of his titles, his lands, his name, and his house, and was to be removed from the 5 rivers under the old right, as Elara Voss had been removed 3 years earlier with a sack of bread and a flint, and was to walk out of Aldmere on foot, and the frontier would decide what it wanted to do with him. The steward read the decision in the same voice the scribe had used on Elara 3 years ago. It was the same voice. It might have been the same scribe. She did not turn her head to look. When it was done, Ronan Cale rose from his throne. He had not said anything through Doran's whole speech. He had sat and he had listened, and his face had not changed, and at the end of the court's decision, he stood up and he spoke, and what he said was short. "The court has ruled. The ruling stands. I will not overturn it. Tomorrow I will hold a further session to discuss the state of the kingdom. I have, in the last 2 weeks, come to doubt that I am the man to hold this chair. I am going to put that doubt to the court in the morning, and the court will do with it what it wishes. That is all for today." He sat down. The hall emptied slowly. People did not hurry out of it because nobody knew, yet, how to hurry out of a hall after a thing like that had happened in it. Elara stood by the pillar until most of the court had gone. Ronan Cale did not come down off his throne. He sat in it, looking at a point in the air between himself and the door, and when the last of the court had left the hall, and only his steward remained beside him, he finally turned his head, and he looked across the whole long length of the hall at her. She met his eyes. She did not speak. She did not move. She did not curtsy, which 3 years ago she had done badly, and for which she had been laughed at, and which she would never do again in any hall anywhere. She simply held his look for a moment that was as long as she wanted it to be and no longer, and then she turned and she walked out of the hall with Lady Varin and Aelin and Kellen and Havel at her shoulders, and she did not look back. She did not look back at the pillar she had walked past 3 years ago on her way to the dock. She did not look back at the door where Ronan Cale had stopped being the largest thing in her life. She walked down the steps and through the courtyard and down the long hill to the ferry, and she boarded the ferry, and the ferry took her across the black ember in the full clean light of a winter afternoon. And on the other side, at Aldmere, where a man in a leather coat had once handed her a sack of bread and told her to take the West Fork, there was no lantern because it was day, and there was no man because the man had retired. There was only the road. She took it. She took it east this time, not west and not north, east, because east was Hollowbrook, and Hollowbrook was hers again, and there was a house at Hollowbrook with a roof that had probably fallen in the 3 years she had been gone, and a garden that had probably gone back to weed, and a chest in the corner of the main room where a black leather book had once been kept, And she had things to put back in order, slowly, the way a woman puts things back in order. Because she had understood somewhere in the last 3 years, maybe in the back room at the rookery, maybe in the burn, maybe in Lady Varen's field the first time the grass came green, that the largest thing a person could ever be given was not a chair in a hall, and not the love of a king, and not the fear of an enemy, and not even the respect of the people who had once laughed at her. It was the quiet, unremarkable daily work of becoming the person no one had thought she could be. And then after she had become that person, not handing herself over to the ones who wanted her now, she walked east. The road went up a small rise, and at the top of the rise she stopped, and she turned, just once, and she looked back across the river, at the hall on the island, small in the distance now. And she thought about the girl who had stepped off a ferry there 3 years ago with her satchel clutched against her ribs. And she thought, with something that was not quite fondness but was close to it, "You poor, brave, frightened thing. You didn't know. None of it was going to go the way you thought. And you were going to be all right. You were going to be better than all right. You were going to be yours." Then she turned again, toward the east, toward Hollowbrook, toward the rest of her life. And she walked into it on her own 2 feet, under her own name, and the land walked with her quietly, the way the land walks with the people who have learned, at last, how to listen to it.